Okay. So, mic is plugged in this time, unlike last time. Let's see. Any questions? Questions. Studio. Questions or say hi or whatever. Let's get something going. Look at some comments. Oh yeah. One thing I want to bring up today. One subscriber, Jose, was asking about the EU diphthong, and there is no EU diphthong. I know that I think I've heard about this somewhere before. That I guess some teachers teach this or something. Hello, curious soul. I'm doing well. Hope you're doing as well as well. Yeah. Let me know if you have any questions. But specifically, the EU diphthong is supposed to be like in for example, you or use or whatever. And I think that this is inaccurate and not a good thing to teach because the right, so this is like the y plus the u, but this makes it seem like the y is like an e sound, which it is very close to the e sound, but it's not eu, like, or even if I say it quickly, eu, like that's just not what it is. It'll sound pretty similar, but I don't think that's accurate. And remember, the y is sometimes called or it's called a semi-vowel along with the w, and there are reasons for that. But I don't teach it that way. I teach it as a consonant sound because that's how we think of it. We think of it as a consonant sound, and it really is. It's very similar to a vowel in many ways, but here it is in no way a vowel. It's y, not y. Very close to the sh and the j, right in that area, and then we just go into oo, you, not eu. So anybody who was maybe taught the eu diphthong or whatever, it doesn't exist. Maybe in the way some people speak, I don't know, but even if that's true, it's not something you have to care about, and I would not think about it that way because it just makes it unnecessarily complicated. I see that I happen to go to Patreon and hit refresh, and I noticed that Haring, or the Curious Soul, is asking me some stuff over here. Do you want me to answer these now? I assume, which I don't know why you don't just put them in the YouTube chat. Maybe there's not enough space for them. I don't know. Construction of the bridge took 5 years. Constructing the bridge took 5 years. So this is related to something we were talking about before. Construction of the bridge took 5 years. Constructing the bridge took 5 years. Yeah, okay. How do I differentiate between the event or act connotation and the process connotation of its meaning? As it's clear here that the process is what is referred to given the duration of the said process mentioned towards the end. Okay, so this is another good example. I'll go ahead and paste these two here. These great issues. Yeah, I know. It's stupid. I mean, there's a reason for it. I know that they have the limitation in place there, but I think that they could extend that a little bit. You only get 200 characters. Like they should probably double that, I think. Yeah, I understand. So these two sentences here, why did it paste like that? It's a weird way for it to paste. Okay, let me write that up then. Construction of the bridge took 5 years. Versus constructing the bridge took 5 years. Same with my number here, 5 years. There's absolutely no difference here. There's a very slight different feeling between construction and constructing because they're two different forms. Uh, but there's no difference in meaning. There's no like it's two ways to say exactly the same thing. Like both of them work perfectly fine. It does not matter which one you choose. Like there's really no difference. And I know this is kind of complicated. With what we were talking about before, with like how the ing feels and stuff like that, um, that is it's still true. It's just the difference between these two is so small it doesn't matter. That difference in feeling doesn't matter. Um, but when we talk about, because remember, constructing the bridge, um, I mean this is a verb, but let's see if I say like right, running is fun. Running is fun. I'm using that ing form to make the verb a noun, right? Which there's different ways depending on the verb to make it into a noun. Like construction is another way to make a verb into a noun. Um, and we're basically doing the same thing, constructing, right? Constructing the bridge took 5 years. So it's sort of like a noun in the process form. And we say running is fun. So the which we would actually say the act of running is fun, not the process of running is fun, which probably makes it even more confusing to you. Um, so I think the way that you're approaching this particular problem with like the tion ending versus the ing ending, I don't think it's very constructive, and I don't think that it's the best way to approach this particular thing because um, maybe not in all cases, but in a lot of cases where you have these two options here, it doesn't make a difference. It really does not make a difference. There's no formality difference. There's no anything, just a small feeling difference that doesn't actually matter. Does it have anything to do with ION coming at the end of some specific verbs? Hello, David. Welcome to the chat. I'm doing fine. Hope you're doing well. I'm in the middle of trying to figure this out. I'm trying to understand the question here. Does it have anything to do with ION coming at the end of some specific verb that have Latin origin? Well, that have a Latin origin. So in what way? Like, does it have? Hello, Theris. I think you're new here. Welcome to the chat. Feel free to ask questions or say hi, which you already did. So say some other things if you want. I checked Edom online. Okay, well that's useful. That's good. Etymology is always useful for these types of things. But it for your question, like, does it have anything to do with the ION ending? In what way? Like does that help cause the difference in feeling, or does that, like, I don't know specifically what you're asking about the relationship between ION and this problem. Hello, Sedent. Long time no see. Glad you could join us today. Hope everything is well with you and where you are. It said ION is used with some verbs to refer to the state. Okay. That sounds accurate, yes. So yeah, if we were to analyze that and break it down, so construction of the bridge took 5 years. It's like, so the another way to say that is, which obviously constructing the bridge took 5 years. That's another way to say it, but a third way to say it would be the bridge was under construction, right? Using the passive tense, passive voice. So the bridge was under construction for 5 years, right? And so we can say it was in the state of being constructed for 5 years. Now, notice I'm using the ing, right? It was in the state of being constructed for 5 years. So I think that's where this problem lies. Is like a state seems to be like a static thing, but we can talk about the state of doing something or the state of being something. And so that's why what I was talking about before with the difference between event and process, it works in a general sense, especially when we're talking about, say, like walk versus walking, just like say I walk or I am walking. But when it comes to using the ing form for creating nouns and things like that, it may not work exactly the same way. And I'm sure under the surface, in the subconscious, there's connections of why we do these things and whatnot. But um, the thing that I was telling you before about event and process might not directly apply to these cases. They're just the result on the surface is that it's just multiple ways to say the same thing. Um, so specifically Latin origin verbs, yeah. So I think, and I know you're trying to dig deeper. You're trying to get a better perspective on this, and that's good, right? I mean, that's the approach I like to take. I did with the prepositions. I'm going to be doing it with verbs. Um, but think of it like this, right? So if we're talking about the hidden connections in the subconscious, right? It's really dark in there. um, yes, Eden, I am doing well. Thank you. Um, I just saw your comment there. So it's really dark in the subconscious, right? That's why it's the subconscious. There's no light, right? Um, and so it's like a cave, a dark cave, right? And you have a torch, right? And you're trying to go through the cave, and you're trying to find these connections. Okay, and so right, so we were talking about like act or like the event in the process, act in the process, whatever. And it's like, okay, this is like the main root of this thing, right? But then it has, a little branch that goes off to connect to something else, and it's not actually part of the core thing. Um, and so you're digging around and you're like, oh, okay, so there's this use, like this ION and this ING. Like what's the difference? How do I know which one to use? When really, in this particular case, it doesn't matter. And again, it might depend on the context and the particular verb we're talking about. Maybe there would be a difference, but I think in most cases, in the examples you've given me so far, there's really no difference in meaning. And so what's under the surface and what's above the surface kind of comes out to be the same for that particular like little branch of the root, where the core would actually be sort of what I was telling you before, the difference between the ing and the non-ing. But notice also here, we're actually talking about something different because when we say construction, we're not talking about the verb anymore, right? Um, what I was telling you originally was it would be like construct versus constructing. That would be the core idea, the root idea there. But here we're talking about construction and constructing, and it actually doesn't make a difference. So um, I would say, which maybe I could be wrong, but I would say that this particular line of inquiry leads to a dead end. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. They're just two ways to say the same thing. And sometimes that happens. When I was trying to find the logic of the prepositions, there's occasionally when I would actually hit a dead end here and there. And I'd have to kind of go back and be like, okay, so that doesn't really work. And that's because it's a subconscious. Even for me as a native, I had to go down and try to explore it as best as I could. I have the resources of a native. I know it sounds good and what's possible, so that helps a lot. I had some sort of guide from my conscious mind, but I also had to go and dig down and try to figure things out too. So, um, David, so it's come to my awareness that Americans don't pronounce the H in herb. This is absolutely correct. We do not. There are some Americans that do. I've heard a few Americans that do it, and it's just like if a British person does it and they say hub, you need to take some hubs, right? Then it's like, okay, fine, it sounds British, whatever. But when an American does it, it just sounds like, why are you doing that? Why? It sounds so annoying. Like, but anyway, whatever. Some Americans do, most Americans don't. And I'm not sure if it's just that one word or whether it remains silent in other similar words, such as herbal tea, silent H, herbal, same thing, right? Silent H, as in the book. Wait, what? Purple book? Okay, anyway, whatever. Sorry for the direct message, no problem. Herbivore, silent H. Herbivorous, silent H. Herbaceous plant, silent H. Herbalism, silent H. Herbalist, silent H. Herbarium, herbicide. Any word related to herb is going to have a silent H. Yes. Now, there's really no way to know that because it's English, right? So who knows? Maybe some of those wouldn't be silent H's, but I can assure you that all of these examples are a silent H. Thank you, Professor, for sharing your insights into my query. No problem. No problem. Yeah, but I like the work you're doing. I like the approach you're taking. It's a little more work intensive because you really have to like dig around and look at the etymology and stuff. But I think obviously it's not for everybody. But if it's sort of an enjoyable process for you and you like trying to find those things and digging around and stuff, I think it can be an extremely powerful way to learn because you're not just trying to like learn from like a grammar rule perspective, like, oh, we use the ing here and we use the ion here, whatever it is. You're actually really digging in and be like, oh, okay, so this comes from this, and then I know that this about this. Let me ask a question. Okay, so now with that information, how could I put these together? And so you're really thinking about how the language is actually put together and how it works, and that's going to give you a much more solid understanding and feeling of the language. So this process, even if you run into some dead ends, this process is going to be very, very useful and powerful for you if you enjoy doing that, because I know not everybody does. I'm kind of the weirdo that, like, every time I would, especially for some of the hard ones, every time I would find one of the logic of the prepositions, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm a genius. It makes perfect sense. And I was just like so super excited. And just because like I'm weird. But anyway, Einstein has joined the chat. Welcome back. Okay, so I know the NG is a very special sound. I don't know if I would put it that way, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of special. Does the M sometimes sound like NG? So, right? If we try to talk about, we say the NG sound, it's just maybe I'm the only one. So I sometimes hear I'm the only one. Okay, we can talk about that. I read in a forum that M was sometimes pronounced as NG. No. I mean, again, different people speak differently. I'm not aware of all the nuances of like even just how an American from another part of the country might speak. But I can tell you based on my experience, the way I speak, and what I've heard of native speakers of English, even in British English included, or Australian English included for this particular point, but especially American English, I don't. It seems impossible for me for the M to be replaced by the NG. Now, for the N to be replaced by the NG, or for the NG, definitely for the NG to be replaced by the N, regular N, that is something that may be able to happen, especially going from NG to N. But not for M, because M closes the lips. What you're probably doing or hearing here, see, and this is one reason why I teach you guys about this. So when we say I'm the or the, whatever, we'll say the since you wrote it with E there. I'm the. Okay. If we clearly enunciate this, we're going to close with the M. And then as the M opens, we're going to have that nice good TH there, voice TH. I'm the. Okay, it's just right there, ready to go. However, remember, we have the dental, quote unquote, dental, E and T variation of the TH sound that natives aren't aware of. And that version, remember, it can generally be applied for any th regardless of where it is. At the end of words, it's a bit less common unless it connects to something, but it's a very common variation that doesn't matter, doesn't sound informal, et cetera, et cetera. I've talked about that before. If this is your first time hearing this, for anybody else who is here, go look up my lesson on the th, and I talk a little bit about it in that lesson. But especially for THs at the start of a word, even if there's no special connection before it, and especially if it's one of these common grammar words like the or that or whatever, you can always just use that dental version, right? If it's voiced T or if it's a voiced TH, it's going to be the dental D because that's voiced. So what we can do, instead of clearly enunciating the TH and saying I'm the, we can actually do that dental version, say I'm the. Now, if we're speaking really quickly, you might not actually hear that dental D be pushed out, and it might kind of sound very, very dull, almost like an N in that position. I'm the only one. I'm me. And we don't actually push the D out. We just kind of let it be a dental N in that position, not a regular N, because that would be I'm me. That's harder to do, and it has to be in that dental position because it's supposed to be the dental D. But sometimes we'll get lazy and we'll just kind of not actually push the D out and let it just be a dental N instead. So I'm the only, I'm the only. And I can pretty much guarantee that that's what you're hearing because that sounds very natural to me. Um, so that's for that particular sentence, that would solve your problem. If you have any other examples, I can look at those specifically and see if the same thing applies. But that should be that. Theris, do you use double possession, like cousin's son, mother's sister, or something like that? How does it work? I don't remember, but once I saw this, and it was so incomprehensible for me to understand the kinship related to the speaker. Yeah, I know this can get kind of confusing in languages, um, depending on the language. I think some languages make it a little easier, but um, so yeah, it depends on exactly what you're saying. So what you wrote here, you put or something like that. So yeah, it would be something like that because this doesn't quite make sense. So let's say so you're talking about right. If we do it this way, we wouldn't normally say it this way, but it's perfectly grammatical in English. We like to use that apostrophe s, but if we do it backwards, right, we could say the sister of the mother of the son of my cousin, right, and you could sort of explain it backwards using of. Uh, but especially because it's backwards, we don't we don't like to do that. So what you would do instead is you have to have that apostrophe s. Like if you're saying if that's the whole relationship, cousin, son, mother, sister, and you're talking about that person, but that's the whole chain and it's all one thing, then you have to put an apostrophe s on every single one except the last one. Okay, so my cousin's son's mother's sister. And that by itself, even for us natives, we're going to be like, okay, wait. So the cousin, so it's the son of the cousin, okay, and then the mother of that son, okay. So yeah, and then the sister of the mother, and because it's just so many, even for us natives, we would probably have to sit there and think about, okay, what's going on. So it's not just confusing to you, but the very simple answer here is that you put an apostrophe s for every person in the chain except the last one. Okay. Um, I hope that answers your question. I don't know if there's some other variation that I'm not thinking of that maybe you're asking about, but that should be it. Yeah. Okay. Uh, Maxim, welcome to the chat. I don't know if I've seen you here before. Maybe not. But either way, welcome. Thanks for joining us. What is the most efficient way to practice shadowing? Oh, good question. Is it listening to 5 to 10 audio part and repeating? And you mean like 5 to 10 minute uh, audio and repeating it with the same intonation at the same time, recording yourself to compare how you sound. Okay. Okay, good, Einstein. I see your comment there. Perfect. So for Maxim, technically there is no best way to do shadowing, just like there's not actually an objective best way to learn a language. Although there are things that are maybe more effective than other things. 5 to 10 seconds. Oh, okay. Yeah, good. Yeah, very important detail there because 5 to 10 seconds versus 5 to 10 minutes, would be a very big difference. So I have my way of what I think is like the most effective, the most powerful way to use shadowing. But it's very detailed and it's not for everybody. Okay. Um, and in reality, when I shadow, I'll often use like the whole process. But depending on what I'm doing, like if it's a particular sound or it's a particular word that I'm kind of just practicing to this or that, whatever, there's a different scope. There's sounds to syllables to words to, we can even say phrases to sentences, etc. And you can do shadowing, for any part in that. But if we're talking about, I'm going to do some sentences here, especially since you mentioned intonation. I may not always use the entire process all the time, but when I go and I do intense shadowing, what I do is, right, there's the sounds, there's the rhythm, stress, intonation, right, all that, which I misspelled rhythm. There's a Y there, rhythm. And then the linking or connections, as I like to call them. So what I like to do, what I think is the most effective and powerful, especially if you're working with a really short clip, right? Just like one short sentence at first. As you get longer, you're working on maybe the flow of longer sentences and stuff. Obviously, you can get a little bit longer, that's fine. But regardless of the length, I will first go in and it doesn't really matter which one, but I'll first go in and say, look at the sounds. Because I always do like sound first. I think it's generally the best to start there. Um, Other people, start with the stress or intonation first when they're doing a language, but I like to do the sounds. So that's what I'll do in the shadowing. I'll pick the sounds first, and I'll go and I'll really focus as I'm listening to the recording. I'll keep going back, right? So I'll try to say the word first. I'll listen to it. Okay, just you listen to it a couple times, get it in your brain. Okay, and as I'm listening to it, I'm going to try to kind of start figuring out what my mouth would do without actually saying anything. So I'm kind of trying to match, okay, what are my ears hearing and how would that fit in my tongue? And I start imagining that relationship. And then I'll play the audio again after times. And then I'll start trying to shadow it, starting from the beginning. And as soon as I feel like I messed up or it's a little bit off, I'll immediately skip back and I'll repeat that. And I'll immediately skip back and repeat that until I feel like I have, okay, it's good enough, or okay, I'm going to have to work on that sound a bit, later, or this word a bit later. I'm not going to sit there for like an hour trying to get the same word over and over again. And so I'll kind of go on, and I'm not really worried about the linking or the stress yet. I'm just focused on the sounds, okay, making sure that the sound is good to go to that sound, to go to that sound. And of course, that kind of includes the linking a bit, but I'm not really so worried about how exactly words are connecting. I'm just focused on the exact sounds. And I'll do that through the whole sentence, going back, as many times as I need, not necessarily to the beginning, although that can be a useful technique. But like say I got this far and then there's this word I'm kind of not saying right, so I'll go back to that point until I get the whole sentence done. Right. So this technique is super super useful for really short sentences because it's so detailed. Right. If you have a longer sentence, you might want to do it not so detailed, but so I'm trying to notice things. I'm trying to match my tongue to what I'm hearing. I'm trying to do all these things and just repeating until I get it as closely as I can. Then I'll go through and I won't worry about the sounds, and I'll focus specifically on, okay, how does the rhythm sound? How does the stress sound? How does the intonation sound? And I'll kind of try to match that. So I'm doing a whole second pass where now I don't even care about the sounds, right? If the sounds aren't right when I'm doing the rhythm, stress, or intonation, who cares? Like, it doesn't matter. Because your brain only has so many resources. So you're focused on the sound, you're going to miss the stress and rhythm. If you're focused on the rhythm and stress, you're not going to be able to track all the sounds, and that's fine. So I'll do exactly the same process, but with the rhythm and stress and the intonation. And then the linking, I actually usually do the linking between the sounds and the rhythm and stress, especially because the linking can be affected by the rhythm and stress, depending sometimes. That goes a bit into chunking too, which I'm making a lesson on, but I wouldn't worry too much about that because it's a minor thing. But in that flow of sounds, right? Because then I'm going to try to notice, because like, let's say, right, in English, a good example with like did and you, right? So okay, there's a D sound at the end of did, there's a Y sound at the start of you. And so you might expect something like did you, where there's a did, right? But you might hear did you with maybe a stop. You might hear did you where the D and the Y blend, which is the most common thing that happens. And then you notice, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, actually, there's a jit sound here, right? And then you try to make sure that you actually hit that instead of just trying to go based off what your brain might expect, and really just pay attention to exactly what is there and try to match it perfectly. So sounds, linking, and then rhythm, stress, intonation. Um, and you can easily, for say a short sentence, like if it's, say it's like, I don't know, um, I like, okay, I really like cats. I really like cats. Just a short little sentence like that, right? It's like 1 second, 2 seconds long, right? I really like cats. Um, you could spend 5 minutes doing this process on that sentence, right? And so it's very time intensive, it's very detailed, but what you get out of it for that detail uh, is a lot, right? Um, Alternatively, which also slowing things down can really help in this process too, like going from slow to fast. If you add that to that whole process, where you're slowing the audio down and trying to like match it at the slower speed so you can really handle things a bit better, and then like speed it up every time that you so you speed it up a little bit, you speed it up a little bit, and then now you can't say it as well. You stop at that speed until you can say it, perfectly or as good as you can, and then you speed it up again until it's back to like the normal speed of the sentence. Um, and that gives you even more, but again, that takes a little bit more time, a little bit more effort. So that's optional, but that makes it even more powerful. Um, Alternatively, instead of doing like the slow to the fast and going in and doing all these different passes with the different areas of pronunciation, um, you can do sort of like a light shadowing, which which you could do sort of a light version for all of these steps, but you can do like an overall light version. And what you don't want to do is to simply try to repeat, because you're not paying attention to what's actually going on. You're just, okay, I hear these words and I'm going to say these words. And like, you're not really paying much attention to how you sound. You're not paying attention to exactly what the speaker is saying, because there's some sounds you might not even be hearing yet. And then you have to go to train your ears a little bit. So you're always trying to notice things that maybe you didn't notice before, which is a process. You're always trying to make your tongue match as closely as possible. And if it's not quite sounding right, you have to go in and say, okay, let me make a little change and see if I can get that closer. Okay, that wasn't closer. Let me try to make, okay, that was a little bit closer, right? And you're making these little changes in your tongue, always trying to notice what is going on there, not just what your brain sort of wants to hear, like what you might expect from the spelling, for example. Um, so don't just mimic it. Don't just like repeat it without paying attention. That's a completely useless exercise that's not going to get you anywhere, as far as pronunciation goes. So a light version of shadowing would kind of be doing more or less what I said before. You can even just pick one of those areas if you want, but you don't have to do it so super intensively. Um, However, you're not going to get as much benefit out of it. And if you have some natural talent, that's going to take you a long way. And you actually, I don't want to say you don't have to do the intensive shadowing or like the really detailed shadowing, but you can get a lot farther with a lot less intensity. So if you don't have any talent for it, then I highly recommend that if you want to develop a native or near native accent, this is the way to do it. Okay, if that's your goal, this is the way to do it. If you just want to sound better, you want to sound like, yeah, okay, maybe I'm not really sure where your accent is from, but I hear some sort of accent. You sound pretty good. You're very understandable. You don't necessarily have to do that so intensively, but you will still benefit a lot from doing it that intensively, and you'll learn a lot faster. So it really kind of depends on your goals. Um, what's your time frame? How much time do you have? That you don't have to sit there doing it for hours and hours. That's not what I'm saying. But how much time do you have every day that you can consistently do it? Or can you do like 5 to 10 minutes every single day doing this type of practice? Um, Et cetera, et cetera. So that's one reason why there's no best way to learn a language or one best way to do shadowing, because it also depends on your particular goals and what the point you're trying to reach, right? Um, but to get to the top, I would recommend my very thorough, intense shadowing practice consistently every day. And um, there's one thing that I didn't mention here, So you asked specifically, right? So repeating it with the same intonation at the same time, recording yourself to compare how you sound. So these are other variables, right? So doing it at the same time, yes and no. Uh, what I like to have a little intermediary step where, as I said, I'll listen to it and kind of figure out maybe what my tongue is going to do. And then I might listen to it and try to say it, and listen to it and try to say it without being at the same time. And recording yourself during this process can be very, very useful. That's perfectly fine. Um, but then as I kind of maybe get a little comfortable with it, I'm like, okay, yeah, it doesn't quite sound the same, but I'm kind of trying to, I have the training wheels. Like, okay, let me try to say it a few times without speaking on top of it. So I can just kind of get my mouth used to trying to do that. And then I'll go and I'll try to say it like right on top of the recording. And that you definitely want to record yourself for, because you can put both files into Audacity and you can actually see the sound waves and little things like that. If you don't know what Audacity is, you can look that up. It's a free audio recording or audio editing software. Um, so yes, recording yourself is always super, super useful. Even if you're just like, say you're just speaking, whether to yourself or in a conversation, if you record it and you listen back to yourself, there's going to be a lot of things that, number one, you didn't notice at the time because it's not automatic in your muscle memory, and like, you were communicating, you were focused on the meaning. But then you go, oh yeah, okay, I didn't say that right, I didn't say that right, and you'll notice it. But then there's some things that you thought you were saying really well, but when you listen to yourself in the recording, you're like, wow, that's really bad. Maybe not really bad, but it's not as good as you thought it was. So recording yourself for pronunciation is always super, super useful, regardless of the exact exercise you're doing, but especially for shadowing. Yes, because you get more of an objective sound to how you're actually producing the things, instead of just listening to your own voice inside your head, as you're, from your own ears as you're speaking. Um, so basically, what you said plus what I said. Yes, and then add the slow to fast, and you have like a perfect approach, I would say. Um, so take that as you will. Play with it. If some things are a little too much, maybe tone it down, or just focus on one area for a while, like just focus on the sounds for a while, make sure that's good. Or you're asking about intonation and stuff, so maybe focus on the rhythm and the stress and the intonation, and don't worry too much about the sounds at first. That way you don't have to do like all these steps. You can sort of have a mini mission where, say, you spend, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, even a month, however long you want or however long you need. Let's say, a week, where every day you're just focused on like the rhythm and stress of sentences, right? It's like, okay, the sound's fine, I'll look at those later, but you're just, okay, I really want to focus on the rhythm and stress. And that's your mini mission. And then after that time, maybe you go back to the same sentences that you're already familiar with. And now you kind of have the rhythm down, maybe not perfectly, but you have a better idea of that. And now you're going to kind of focus on the sounds and make sure that those sound good, right? So there's many ways to do it. You could do it in pieces, you could do it all at once, and you got to kind of figure out what works best for you. David, okay, my question is about drum roll verbs. The heck is a drum roll verb? And more specifically, two verbs I can never tell apart: lie and lay. I assume that these type of verbs would be what you call drum roll verbs. I've never heard that term, drum roll verbs. Like, why are they called that? Like, there's no drum roll is like, as your like anticipation building up to like the reveal. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, so one, do you use the past simple and past participle forms listed in dictionaries? Two, do native speakers confuse the two as well? And three, any tips on how to remember the difference between the two for life? Okay. I'm going to request that you give me some other examples of these pairs, because I know what you're talking about, but they don't come to my mind right away. Lie and lay is a little bit special. I know that for sure. So I'll talk about that, but if you can give me some other pairs that are also drum roll verbs. Oh, I see. No, yeah, I got what you mean. Now I get it. Yeah, about drum roll verbs. Yeah, see, I totally misunderstood that. That's why you put the 2 stars. See, In writing, we may not know. We may not know. Um, I probably would have put that in like parentheses and then put dot 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 after the drum roll because dot 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 tells us there's a gap there, right? So about drum roll dot 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 verbs. I probably would have read it, understood it better if you did that instead. Okay, that aside. But yeah, so these types of verbs, if you can give me some more examples, I can also answer in a general sense. But for lay and lie, or lie and lay, whew, I actually answered a question for this on Quora a while back. I don't do a lot on Quora, but occasionally I'll answer some questions on there. Just give me like some more exposure to the channel and other places. And let me see, because I really liked my answer for it. Um, let's go to me. Content. I've answered quite a bit of questions. Quite a bit of questions. Quite a few questions. Where is it? I guess I'll just have to pull this back out of my brain. Oh, here it is. Okay, so this specifically was asking about which sentence is correct. I want to lay down or I want to lie down. So we do have the extra down here, but that's okay. This was my answer. And I'll start here, and if I need to add anything, I will. So now first note that my answer here is focused on spoken language, not written language, and especially not formal written language. Okay, formal writing works a little different and tends to follow more of what's proper. So there is a correct answer between lay and lie, but it really doesn't matter, at least in American English. Okay. And this is coming from an English teacher, so you might be surprised, like, what do you mean it doesn't matter? Aren't you supposed to teach us correct English? And yes, but here's the thing. In real native speech, these two are constantly mixed up. Natives mix these up all the time. Probably not all natives, right? The more educated you are, the higher your level of education, the less likely you are to mix them up. So there are people who use them correctly. But I think many, if not most people, they either don't know and or don't care. Um, and this is one of the things that I think is also changing, right? I tell you guys occasionally about grammar points that are changing, and this would be, particular verb usage that's changing. Probably within the next 50 to 100 years or so, they will simply be interchangeable. Like it won't matter, okay? Which is the way that most people already use them. They're more or less interchangeable for most people in everyday speech. Or one of the two might fade away, right? Who knows? Maybe we'll just be left with one of them. And that's a natural process in language. And in fact, there might be certain cases where one sounds a bit off, right? Where one might sound a little bit better. But even I, as an English teacher, use these two interchangeably in speech. Okay. Yes. Okay. So I think another one that you might be talking about is raise and rise. I see lots of laughter. I don't know what that's directed at this point. But so with lay and lie, that's basically my answer. Like technically, there's a difference, and what the difference is, if you want to use them correctly, because I mean, you can choose. You just like, okay, well, I want to use them correctly because really educated people do that, and I want to sound as good as I can in English. Then it might be important to you to use, to choose which one. So let me go here really quick. So to lie means to be in a horizontal position. Okay, so it's just like you lie on the bed. Okay, So I'm going to lie on the bed. The verb to lay means to place something or someone on something, right? And I'm reading this from a thing here on Quora because I didn't want to look it up. I already had that open. So this matches rise versus raise. Okay, that's another pair. So we say the sun rises because there's nothing that rises the sun, right? Which that was actually grammatically incorrect for me to say because I'm trying to focus on the verb rise, but there's nothing that raises the sun. That would be grammatically correct. It just rises. It does, right? So it sort of does it itself, right? Which we know in reality, it's the Earth is spinning. That doesn't matter because in the language we're talking about the sun rising, not the Earth spinning. So, but if I say the sun raises, we're going to say the sun raises what? Like so there's the sun and it's raising something else. It's making something else go higher. So it's the same with lie and lay. Okay, so I can lie on the bed. I wasn't even sure for a second. I can lie on the bed. And so I'm lying down on the bed, just myself on the bed. Or I can take my wallet and I can lay it on the table. Okay, because now I'm doing something to that thing. So these are stupid verb pairs where like they basically mean the same thing. It's just one is sort of the subject doing it themselves, and the other is the subject doing it to something else or someone else. But rise and raise, you can't use those interchangeably. Those are two separate things. If you try to mix them up, they're going to sound bad. But for lie and lay, that's a special pair that memorize the proper one if you want, but it kind of really doesn't matter. And most natives, as I said, either will make the mistake or they just don't care. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. So yes, native speakers do confuse the two. Any tips on how to remember the difference between them? Okay, think of it like this. This isn't perfect. This is just off the top of my head. So we have like lie, which has I. We have rise, which has I. Right? And there's other pairs like that. I don't know if it's always I. It probably is. But you can think of it as, okay, if it's I, like I lie on the bed, right? Or if I'm sitting in my chair and, right, which like in a court, right? When the judge walks into the court, the bailiff or whoever says, all rise, everybody stand up, right? So you rise, I rise, right? Nothing is making me go up, making me raise. I'm just rising. So I rise, I lie. Okay. So you can think of it as I'm not doing it to something, I'm doing it to myself, right? Or whatever it is. Like the sun does it to itself, it just rises. Where lay, so we say like a, they, right? So it doesn't have to be plural necessarily, but it's something else. It's not me, right? So I lay the wallet, right? Because it's something else. It's outside of me. So you can think a, they, I lie. Or sorry, I, a, they. That's one trick you could use. That's just off the top of my head. There's other little memory tricks you can think about and do whatever works for you. Okay, so when you're meeting someone new, are you more likely to blend the T and Y in nice to meet you? Or stop the T provided you even use the phrase? It absolutely does not matter. It doesn't matter if you're meeting someone new. It doesn't matter if you've known them forever, which if you've known them forever, I don't know why you would say that. It doesn't make any sense. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the formality of the situation. These are two options that are interchangeable. The T plus Y, half the time it's ch, half the time it's a stop T. And it will just say meet you. It does not matter. The only thing I would say is that maybe in a more formal context, it might be a little more common to stop the T and not blend them. But if you say you instead of ya, because ya is the more informal, reduced form of you, which is not necessarily informal. A lot of times it's not, but it can potentially sound a little more informal. Like if you say nice to meet you, that sounds kind of informal in this case. Even if you say nice to meet ya, right? If you reduce you together, it's going to make it sound more informal in this particular case. So not blending it in a formal situation might be a bit more common, but it really doesn't matter. As long as you say you, meet you instead of meet you. Yeah, nice to meet you. Okay. Quitted is wrong. Yes, quitted is wrong. How did you use quit in the past? Quit. It's one of the verbs that don't change. So if I say I quit starting right now. Okay, so there we go. Like I quit my job. I tell my boss I quit. Okay, present tense. If I say, oh yeah, I quit my job last week. Past tense. Or I say, I have never quit a job in my life. Third form, exactly the same. Past participle. There are some verbs like that. Fit is the same. Fit. And I think in the very, very long term, like, if we survive for another 1,000 years or so, and if English survives that long, which it probably will, given its current state, I think that, although it might morph into a new language at that point, 1,000 years, probably not. Probably a bit longer than that, maybe another 2,000 years. But anyway, the point is, I think the very long trajectory, because we're already seeing a lot of the irregular verbs that have three forms are kind of, a lot of them have already changed to just have two forms, where like the past and the past participle are the same, like think, thought. And we're starting to see some of them, like sing, sang, sung, that we talked about last week. Sang is starting to replace that third form, and so it's starting to become sing, sang, sang, but people still use sung. So English, as I said before, English seems to have this very long, slow over time tendency to make the language simpler, to make the grammar simpler, and for whatever reason. And so because of that, I think eventually we're just going to have like past, present, future be all the same for like most verbs. Go and be would probably be like a few of the holdouts that don't change. But I think a lot of verbs, say over the next 1,000 years, are going to kind of just go the way of quit and fit, and just be like quit in all cases. So Magwaz put a YouTube symbol icon. So I don't know what that means, but okay. I don't even know how you did that. That's cool. Mario, sorry it took me a second to get to you here and acknowledge your presence, but yes, welcome. Glad you were here again. Finn, hello. Finn, yes, hello to you too. I don't think I've seen you here before either. Maybe. I don't know. Usually I recognize a lot of the regulars, but if I've only seen you like once or twice in the past live streams, then I don't know. I don't remember everybody. But if this is your first time, welcome. Glad to have you here. I see you also asked some questions, so we'll get to that in a second. Thank you a lot. I'll try the detailed approach. You're welcome, Maxim. Maguaz, have you ever called to customer service? Okay, so called customer service. Okay, call does not usually use to. This is a very common mistake. Call does not usually use to. It can use to, but there's a difference there. So if I say I called my friend, right? So I have a phone, I call my friend. Okay, there's no to there. But let's say I see my friend, on the other side of the street, and I want to get his attention or her attention. And I say their name, or say their name is John, right? So I say, "Hey, John." So I'm calling to my friend. Okay, that's what call to means. Usually doesn't have to. So have you ever called customer service and we need to conjugate be. Have you ever called customer service and were assisted, or customer service and were assisted by a foreign agent, which English it's hard to understand. Okay, so yeah, whose English is hard to understand? Uh, Things, yes. This is actually a thing that I don't think most Americans, but a lot of Americans find very, very annoying. Um, that, especially if it's like technical support, it's usually like, it sounds like somebody from India or, you know, that area of the world. Um, I don't want to say they're all Indians because they're probably not, but very often, you'll get somebody with who sounds like they have an Indian accent. And this is, outsourcing because the United States has been outsourcing everything for like the last 40 years or so, um, which puts us in a very bad position, but that's a different topic. Anyway, so yes, that is a very common thing. Sorry if my question is no it's. There's no it there. No need for it. Sorry if my question, because it would be my question. So you're saying my question, right? So sorry if my question is kind of off topic. I'm just curious because in the future I want to apply to the call center. Oh, okay. Um, yeah, I mean, off topic questions are fine. We're here for English, of course, but you can ask whatever you want within reason. uh, yeah, I mean, so sometimes because I've experienced that myself too. In my experience, a lot of the time they're not difficult to understand. It's just they have an accent, right? Um, I've even had like some Spanish speakers that even like occasionally I've had some Spanish speakers where like their accent was just so thick that I couldn't really understand them very well, even though I speak Spanish, right? Because they're speaking English with a really thick accent. So that applies to really any language. But most of the time I haven't had that problem. Sometimes, whether Indian accent, Spanish accent, whatever accent, I have had a little bit of a problem understanding the person. So if you want to apply for a job like that, what I would say is at the very least, get your pronunciation to a point that you're clearly understandable. And then in your particular case, if your goal isn't to sound exactly like a native, then maybe kind of make sure you enunciate things a bit. Usually I tell you don't worry about enunciating, use it as a tool like natives do. We don't use it as a normal way to speak. But in this particular case, for your particular goal, and because you're going to be at a call center where people need to understand you clearly, then in that case, you're probably going to want to enunciate a bit more. You want to make sure your pronunciation is clear enough. You can still have an accent, that's fine. But I would set that as your goal, or at least your minimum goal, um, and then just you should be fine. Yeah. So, Finn, is there such a thing as in this case we need a, yeah. Is there such a thing as a soft D in American English? Wonderful. I do. I came to landing, holding are good examples. They don't sound like an initial D or an alveolar tap. Nobody seems to mention how D seems softer sometimes. I'd even compare to a Spanish D sound. Well, it's definitely not a Spanish D sound. I can guarantee you that, because the Spanish D equivalent in English would be the what I call the dental D variation of the voice th. Instead of saying the, we say the. It's just pretty much a straight Spanish D. Um, Natives aren't even aware that they do this. I wasn't aware that I do this until somebody asked about it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, we do that." And now I hear it everywhere on the news, everywhere. So it's not a Spanish D. I can guarantee you that, because that's going to replace the th. It's never going to replace a regular D in English. Otherwise, you just sound weird. However, well, I guess I can't say never because there are some interesting things like in wonderful that we might be able to do wonder. No, never mind. Yeah, never. I was thinking about the N and how we can move the N, but we're not going to do it here. Okay, so I don't know if you've seen my lesson on which also okay. I guess you have some other things here, and that soft D seems to happen after M, N, and L. Understand too has the soft D. Okay, so I don't know if you've seen my lesson on the 4 Ds of American English. Um, and I need to make another lesson. I'm gonna have a whole once I finish the pronunciation course. I'm gonna have a special mini series about the range and flow of sounds in English, and especially for the stop sounds, and most especially for T and D. This idea of a range is not only extremely accurate, but super useful for you to understand what's happening in English. So let's talk briefly about that. What I mean by range is on one side, and this will apply especially to consonant sounds, right? Vowel sounds, the idea of a range works a little bit differently. So we'll just focus on consonant sounds. So we have on one side where there's the nice, clear, perfectly enunciated, strong version of the sound, right? So for D, it would be D, 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 right? We hear it nice and clearly. There's good force of the breath. Okay, nice. Now that is going to happen at the start of a stressed syllable. Okay, for most consonant sounds, it doesn't really matter where it is in the word. But for the stop sounds, because of how the stop sounds physically function, in part because of how they physically function, we have several versions of them, depending on various details. So if a D sound is at the start of a stressed syllable, it doesn't matter if it's at the start of the word or in the middle of the word, if it's at the start of a stressed syllable, it's strong. Okay. This would technically be called aspirated. Um, Although because the D is voiced, you're not going to hear the breath. So I don't know if it's technically called aspirated in this case, but the right? We hear that breath. So it's the same with the D. We just don't hear the breath because of the voice. So strong D. I call it a strong D. Okay. So that would be like, say, I don't know, dig, dog. I'm trying to think of words off the top of my head. A door, right, in the middle, so it's is unstressed. A door, right? Um, so that's the first D. That's a nice, clearly enunciated option. Now, on the other end of the range, we have a dropped sound, right? That's the logical opposite of nice, clear, strong, enunciated sound, no sound, right? Now, not every sound can drop, and not every sound, you can't just choose what sounds to drop when, right? But there are certain times where some sounds might disappear. The T is a really good example. When we say but, if I say, think of one that's not some sort of special linking case. If I say like but and my car, right? But my car is red. But my, I'm actually not doing a T there. That's possible. It's one way to do that particular word in that case. Um, so there are times where maybe you can drop the D, like if we say hand, uh, it can maybe drop. We're not going to worry too much about the linking and how that can affect it. That's a separate related topic. But that would be the logical end, right? A drop sound. Now, if we go down this range for D, so we have a strong D or an aspirated D, right? Nice and strong. Then the next step over would be the weak D or the unaspirated D. And the difference between the strong and the weak versions or the aspirated and unaspirated versions for the voiced sounds is a lot harder to hear than for the voiceless ones. If I do like a P and I say pick, you can hear that, right? Pick. Or if I say apple, apple, bull, you can hear that there's not that breath there. And so there's a more noticeable difference. But if I say dog, okay, or if I say, let's see here, what's a weak D? Adding. Well, actually, there's actually a flap D. That's the other weak D. Yeah, it's hard to find one that doesn't go into the second weak D, which is the flap D, the alveolar tap or whatever. So anyway, whatever, it doesn't matter. There's a strong one and a weak one. If we go further down the range, right, and it makes sense that this would be closer to no sound because it's not as strong, right, and it's softer, right? So actually, the ones that you're asking about, maybe with the exception of do, and possibly with the exception of holding. And then what was that other one you said? Understand. Yeah, these would be softies. Because the softy, or sometimes they say soft, weak D, softy, same thing. It doesn't matter. They're not as forceful, unaspirated. That is at the start of an unstressed syllable. Okay, and we're going to talk about some of the specific cases that you have here as well. But it's start of an unstressed syllable. And be careful because we see like landing, for example. And I think the way the dictionary separates this, it would be land in, right? But that's not accurate to speech, which is one reason why I think the dictionary isn't the best source of pronunciation information, because that D will kind of sound like it moves over just as if it were two words and the D were to connect, like if I say land is, It doesn't sound like land is, it's land is. Um, so same thing here, landing, landing, landing. So it's at the start of an unstressed syllable, it's going to be weak, okay? Same thing with wonderful, wonderful. With do, if do is a content word, if it's the verb like I do the dishes, it's strong because it's stressed. If it's like I do not understand, and we don't contract it, or don't. Well, actually, don't is stressed because of the negative. But if we don't contract, we say I do not, I do not, I do not, I do not. It's actually a weak D. Um, when D replaces the main verb, that can be a little tricky. But anyway, I came to. Okay, this is a special case with the preposition to. I've talked about this before in the lives. But basically, the preposition to is super, super special. And that T is very susceptible, or meaning that it can be easily affected by the sounds before it. Very special case. And this is part of because of how the T works in American English. And it sounds like a D because it wants to become a flapped D, but it can't actually flap because of the M before it. So it'll just turn into a weak D, came to, came to. And it can be a T. Sometimes it'll come out that way. There's nothing that says you can't do it as a T. It's just in American English, it will commonly become a D. Landing, we talked about. Holding. So we have the L-colored O, and the half L or the dark L, I like to call it the half L because it's you just don't bring your tongue up all the way, so it's a half sound. I call it a vowel. And I know people disagree with me, but the way that it's placed in the mouth, the way that it generally functions is very much like a vowel. It's not exactly the same as a vowel, but it's basically a vowel sound. And you have cases like this where you're going to go, the L and the D are pretty close together. And so when we go ol up to that D, it's actually a little harder to flap the D. And if we're speaking quickly, you can still flap the D. You say holding, 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 holding. It's going to sound a little bit different because of where we're coming from and where we're going to. Just like if we say water, that flap D going into the R sounds a little bit different than if I say adding, adding, because now we're going from the flap to the E. So the flap D doesn't always sound exactly the same, but if you're speaking quickly and you say holding, you can flap it, but I wouldn't worry about that. It doesn't really matter. We will commonly just do a weak D there. So what you're asking about, like a soft D, is perfect. I already talked about that. I talked about that in the main lesson, and all of these would be examples of that. The other word, understand, right? Understand. So we have secondary stress on unstressed der, and then primary stress on stand. Understand, understand. So it needs to be a weak D because it's not stressed, right? Then if we go from the weak D, I know this is beyond your question, but just to finish this for the sake of completion, if we go beyond the weak D to the flapped D or the alveolar tap, right, which I don't like using terminology like that because it's a little too technical. It creates a barrier, I think, for a lot of people to like. I just want to describe it in a way that is more easy and quick to understand. There's no need to learn a lot of this technical stuff, like the technical vocabulary and stuff. So flapped D, which is another thing a lot of people call it. I think that's fair. It's okay because it sort of flaps, right? Or a tapped D, you could call it that. That one, on the range, I also call it like weak 2 or like the second weak D. And it makes sense because what we're really doing is, right, there's the strong D with lots of force, there's the weak D with less force at the start of an unstressed syllable. And then we have, if we go a little bit farther over, now for the flap D, we're not even taking the time to make a nice solid connection and push that D out, even with a little bit of force. We're just, bam, it's just there. Okay, move on, right? So logically, you can actually think of it as like a slightly weaker version of the weak D, right? Because it's even less clearly enunciated, and it's even closer to being not a sound, right? Because we're not even making it nice and clear and full. So if you don't like that idea of thinking of it as like week 2 or the second week D, you don't have to, but logically on the range, that's where it would go. After that, we have the stops. There's a held stop and a glottal stop. And I haven't made a lesson talking about the difference between held and glottal yet. I'm going to, because generally it doesn't particularly matter. But if we think about that logically, if I do a nice clear cutoff for a glottal stop D, like a clear glottal, full glottal, right? If I say like, for example, had. So the glottal, usually sometimes glottal T and glottal D will happen inside of words like garden, garden, garden. Okay, I can actually stop it. And that's not necessarily glottal in that case, but it's a stop D. But with had, for example, it's at the end of the word, there's nothing after it. If there is something after it, it'll activate and become a weak D. But we're just talking about at the end of the word here. Very commonly, it'll be stopped, right? I had. Had you done that? Oh, yes, I had. Right. And that could be a glottal or a held. But if I do a nice, good glottal stop, you can really hear the cutoff, right? Had, right? And so that, even though we're not actually producing the sound physically, we're not saying d, right? It's a bit clearer relatively. It's you can kind of hear it's, well, maybe not for English learners, you have to practice, but for natives, we can hear that it's in the D position. We're just not pushing it out when it kind of gets stuck in the nose a bit. And so that's actually a little bit closer to being more fully enunciated than the held stop, where we kind of go into the position, but we don't clearly cut it off like that. We just kind of let it fade. So if I say had, had, it's just like it kind of would turn into an N if you hold it, okay, right? Because we're not trying to cut off the sound. And so that is sort of like a weak glottal stop, right? So it's even closer to disappearing. And so for the T and D, that's the full range. Of course, with the T in American English, it also has the second weak one, which is exactly the same as a flap D. Some teachers call it a flap T, but I think that is horrible and stupid because there's no difference in the sound. It's just written with a T. So it's exactly the same as a flap D. But anyway, for the D, we have nice, strong, clearly enunciated, slightly weaker at the start of an unstressed syllable. Weak 2, the second weak one, which of course we know it has to be at the start of an unstressed syllable in between two vowels. You tap it, flap it, whatever. Glottal, clear cutoff stop, and then a held, not clear stop, and then a disappeared sound. So that's the full range for D. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that seems like a useful paradigm or way to look at this. Let me know your thoughts on that. But hopefully that answers your question and more. So you can call it the soft D or the weak D. It really doesn't matter. I like to use weak. Sometimes I'll say soft because it's the same idea. But yes, that does exist. And let's see, because you also said, what did you say here? After MN and L. I'm not going to worry too much about that because I already talked a lot about that topic. But it doesn't really matter what's before it necessarily. Okay. Good. So moving on. Oh yeah, you said nobody seems to mention how D seems softer sometimes. Well, I do. I talk about it. So if other teachers aren't talking about it, I don't know why. But it does happen. And those are the reasons why. So David, awesome answer. Thank you. That's what I needed. So lay more or less requires an object in many cases. Yes. Yes. If you're going to use it properly, right, in the correct way. Ramon, welcome to the chat. I'm pretty sure you were here before as well. It seems to me that sometimes you guys dropped the dark L in the words already. Could you explain? Yeah, so I've talked a little bit about this. I've in a couple shorts, and I know David had a follow-up question on the last short for that I released. This is a good question. So this doesn't happen for all words, obviously, but for definitely the two that I know 100% for sure that this happens is already and almost. Okay. Um, was there another one? Already and almost. Oh, and always. Yeah. Already, almost, and always. Okay. Those are the three. So what can happen in those three, maybe there's others, but in these three for sure, is there's actually four different things that you can do. And it's not going to sound more informal. They're variations. Okay. They'll still sound neutral. They'll still sound fine. I've heard people from the other side of the country do exactly the same thing. Okay. It doesn't matter. And in fact, like we'll just, whatever comes out is whatever comes out. Okay. In my speech, I notice I use all four. Okay. So basically, if we say already, okay, the full super clearly enunciated way that it's supposed to be is l colored, so all, just like the word all, all, and then ready, right, or almost, always. Okay. However, the second variation, or the first variation, the second way to say it, would be instead of doing the L colored version with the dark L, what I call it the half L, but with the dark L attached to it, you can actually drop the L part and just say the already, almost, was it always? Okay, that's another variation, or that's a variation. Another variation would be actually to change the to o. And the first version of that is to L color it. So you bring that L back in. You say already, almost, always. Okay, that's a very common way to do it. And of course, again, you can drop the L and just do a straight O. Say already, almost, always. I personally think that the L colored and the L colored O, all and ol, those are going to be the two most common, but you will also hear the other two, the ones without the L. So I would recommend that you just, if you want to do more than one version, just pick the L colored ones. Or if that's a little difficult for you to do, then I would say focus on the one rather than the O one, because I think that sounds a little bit better. But all four of them exist. Yes. Ezra Ayman, hello. And then something in what I assume is Arabic. Hello. Yes. Welcome to the chat. David, what are stores that sell used items called in California? Secondhand stores, thrift stores, charity shops, pawn shops. Well, pawn shop is something special. But all of those work. What I use most commonly and what I hear a lot of people around me using is thrift stores. Yeah. Occasionally I'll hear secondhand. Very rarely do I hear charity. Yeah, thrift stores. My grandma actually, she will often say used stores. Used stores. Yeah. So that's another one. But she's from New York, so maybe that's why. I don't know. By the way, I probably made a mistake in the way I formed the question, but I'm fine with it because making mistakes leads to improvement. Exactly. Exactly. If you're talking about the previous one, what are stores that sell used items called in California? Secondhand stores, thrift stores, charity shops, pawn shops. There's no mistake in that, if that's what you're asking. Yeah, good. Thank you for correcting me. No problem. Please, I want to know how to pronounce better and good, like native speaker, like a native speaker. Exactly like that. Like I just said. Done. No. So better. Here, so we have T, and it's spelled with two T's, which does not matter. That's just spelling. It doesn't make a special T or a longer T or anything. And in American English, this becomes a flapped D. Okay. If you don't know what that is, you can watch my lesson on the four D sounds, or actually better in this case, the four T sounds. I have a lesson about that. But so we say be, right? There's but and be, be. And then we're going to flap that D. It's a flap D sound. Okay, it's not actually a T sound in American English. It's a D sound. So you're going to tap, and then you have to pull into the R, or the vowel, better, better, better. And this is one of the most difficult combinations for English learners. Very, very difficult. So it's going to take some practice. The first thing I would recommend is make sure that you can do an sound really well. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, but you should be able to do a nice clear sound. If you can't do that, if you're trying to say like beta, like in British English, it's not going to sound American. It's not really going to work. You have to have a good Okay. Um, the second thing would be then to practice the flap D without this combination if you don't have that already. So say in, for example, I don't know, adding. Okay. So a flap D happens at the start of an unstressed syllable between two vowels. Okay. That can also apply between words if there's a vowel before and a vowel after it. Things. What was I going to say? Yeah. And don't worry about the spelling. If there's two D's, it doesn't matter. Okay. And I'm giving you examples spelled with T, or with D, but it's the same sound. It's flap D. Okay. Adding, adding. So if you can do that without the after it, and it sounds okay, then you have your two pieces. Okay. Because if you try to do better before having those two pieces, it's not going to work very well. Okay. Because you don't know the first step, you don't know the second step. Make sure you have the steps first. Okay. Then try to put them together. And this is still going to take some practice, it's going to take some time, but if you can do the tap and then you can do the because normally like adding, right? We tap and then we'll go into the next sound, whatever it is. And so that's kind of just a regular tap. Like it's not too difficult. It can be depending, but it's easier than going to after. But when you go to you have to tap and pull. And sometimes we'll do that very lightly. So if this is your teeth here, as the top of your mouth, and then this is the part that goes up and back, like up here. Sometimes instead of tapping here, when we're going to make it easier, we'll just lightly touch here, that part that starts to kind of go up. We'll just lightly tap and then pull into that R. Better. It's like a very light tap D. Better, better, better. And that helps us say it a bit easier. So you got to kind of play with it and just get used to the flap, get used to the R, and get used to putting them together. But that's how it would be pronounced. With good, so we have the g sound, okay? So g, that's in the back, close, g, voiced. Then the never trust the spelling, right? O is usually used to spell, or most commonly used to spell which I'm going to talk about more in a second. But sometimes it's used to spell a different sound like oo. So in mood, it's actually the oo vowel sound. So don't trust the spelling. But in this word, it is okay? And a lot of teachers, if I remember right, I could be wrong, they call this the short oo. And I do not use that term because I think that it is not entirely accurate and it is misleading and it is confusing and it makes things unnecessarily complicated. Of course, what I call it, some people would probably say that my term makes it worse, but I call the sound the high schwa. It's not actually a schwa, okay? The schwa is If you don't know what the schwa is, I have videos for that. But that's the like but or cut. Where the reason I call it the high schwa is because the schwa is sort of like right here in the middle of the mouth, and the height is pretty even. The front to back of the tongue is, it's not in the front, it's not in the back, it's in the middle of the tongue. So it's kind of in the middle of the mouth. But the high schwa, as I call it, it feels in my mouth kind of like, instead of doing it here, if I were to kind of like move it up to the front of the back of my tongue, gives it a different sound. It is a different sound. All right, it's not actually a schwa, as I said, but it's almost kind of like if you just shift that back to you get that right sound. And so that has helped a lot of my students to sort of visualize what's going on and to find the sound more easily. There's some other little details like a certain tenseness in the tongue and stuff. I have a lesson on the high schwa that you can look up. But that's that sound. Okay, so we're going to go g to g, 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 not go, not goo, g. Okay, not g, g. And then the D at the end, this is often stopped. So it's a stop D, whether held stop or glottal stop. And so if you do that, you're going to go into the D position, but you're not actually going to pronounce it. good, good. And I talk about the stop D in the lesson about the 4D sounds, so you can learn more about that there. It is possible to pronounce the D as a weak D or like an unaspirated, softer type D, and that will happen. That's fine, especially if it connects over to like a vowel, like good. I don't know, idea, good idea, good. Actually, that one's going to flap because now it's between two vowels. But regardless of what it does, it's going to be a weak D either way. That's another reason why I call the flap D weak two, because it functions the same way that other consonants would, or other stop consonants would for the weak version when it connects to a vowel. So you could say good, 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 just like a weak D, and that's fine. But commonly it is stopped. Good. So there you go. That's how you say those two words. Okay. Professor, in the American school system, are there any lessons that are taught which focus no es at the end on reversing nominalizations? By the way, your explanation of the lie, lay, and rise, raise was amazing. Well, thank you very much. Nominalizations. I don't even know what that means. So my answer is going to be no. Reversing nominalizations. Things you guys ask me. Okay, so nominalizations are verbs that have been changed into nouns. Oh, yeah, duh. That makes perfect sense. Because I know nominal, but nominalization, I was like, what? Their process that has been changed linguistically into a thing. Yeah, exactly. So basically kind of like what I was talking about, using, like, for example, using the ing form to make a verb into a noun, and then we can talk about it as a subject. Running is fun. Okay, and then reversing nominalizations. I don't even know what that would mean. Like putting it back into a verb, I guess. Anyway, it doesn't matter. No, we are not taught that. If we are, I don't remember it, and it went over my head. But I would very much be surprised, because number one, our school system in the U.S. sucks, like really, really bad. We have a horrible education system. But number two, more importantly, I think this type of concept. See, when natives, like, okay, so I'm a native English speaker. I go to school. I take an English class, right? They make us take English classes. That is primarily focused on, like, yeah, we're learning the grammar and some of the technical stuff, but it's primarily focused on like writing, not on speaking, because we already speak the language, right? And we may learn a bit about like maybe how to form sentences better and like more eloquently, and what's like properly grammatically correct based on or compared to the mistakes that natives make all the time in their real speech. Mistakes. And this particular type of topic, I think, is so, I want to say low level, not in the sense of simple, but it's so low level as in like under the surface. Like a native speaker would already subconsciously know how all that works just from being a native speaker. And this is a point that we don't have to like consciously learn or study, because it doesn't actually really help anything, I don't think. Maybe it is taught and maybe I just don't remember it. I don't know. But it really doesn't seem like something that would be very useful to know, at least as a native, or to consciously know. And even as an English learner, I don't think it's something that like maybe it could be useful, but especially like reversing nominalizations, like that sounds so technical and so grammary. It's like the more technical and grammary something sounds, the less that it's not guaranteed, but the less that it's probably actually useful for your learning. If you're a linguist and you're really interested in those type of things, then terms like that become very useful. But if you're just trying to learn a language, generally, a lot of the very technical and grammary terms and stuff, they're not actually very useful for you. Most of them aren't. Um, David, in one of the Sonic the Hedgehog video games, there's a level. You could just say Sonic, by the way. Everybody knows what Sonic is. One of the Sonic video games, there's a level called Sandopolis Zone, and I'm curious whether this made-up word follows the same stress pattern as cities like Minneapolis or Indianapolis, where the syllable before polis receives primary stress. Sandopolis, yes, Sandopolis. Or right, name for basically. Well, actually, no, the Superman's city, right? He lives in Metropolis, right? Um, so yes, of course, English has all kinds of exceptions, but I would say generally speaking, even for made-up words, we're going to follow the same pattern. Yeah, because made-up words tend to follow the patterns, right? Um, because we have a database of how things would usually be pronounced, and so we're likely to just pronounce it that way. Um, Also, interestingly, to tie that into what I was talking about before with the D, notice it's Sandopolis, Sandopolis, Sandopolis. The N is maybe kind of weakening it a little bit, but Sanda, 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 Sandopolis, Sandopolis. If there weren't an N, I say like Sedopolis, Sedopolis. Maybe sounds a little bit clearer because we're not holding the N for a quick second, but that also would be a strong D. Yeah, in that particular case, because that's sort of a stress syllable. So it's not a weak one, it's a strong one. Do all and I'll sound the same? Very good question. Very good question. No, but they can sound almost the same. And actually, I think maybe they can also sound the same in very lazy speech. So all, as I was mentioning earlier, is ah plus ul, the half L or dark L, as people like to call it. And so that's all, all. So you're using the back of your tongue for ah, and you're going all. For I'll, if I fully pronounce that, it's a diphthong I. Okay, so we're starting in ah, which it only exists in the diphthong. Okay, it's not ah, it's not ah, it's ah, I. And then we're ending in I, like it. It sounds kind of like E, but it's actually not all the way up to E. That would sound wrong. And then we go to that half L or dark L sound. I'll. Now, the thing about unstressed syllables with diphthongs, especially um, especially I, but just in general, is that in faster speech and or lazier speech, which again, that's also part of that range idea, we tend to cut the diphthong. And what that means is we'll only pronounce the first part of it. So instead of saying I'll, we'll drop the I part of it. We'll go straight from the ah to the ul. So again, it's not the same because we're not saying ah in the back. We're saying ah, I'll, 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 I'll. Now, if you say all, let's see. If I say I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. Yes, for this particular word at least, that sounds okay. So it could be I'll, or all. Okay, and we don't think of it as all, but in the flow of regular fast speech, if you say it as all, it's okay. I wouldn't recommend that, but you'll hear it that way. So if you want to cut the diphthong, that's perfectly fine, unless you're clearly enunciating for some special reason, in which case you don't want to cut the diphthong. Like I'll do it, then you don't really want to cut it. Again, that's part of that range. Are you clearly enunciating, or are you speaking a little more lazily, or a little faster? David, Pokemon. Pick one. Oh yeah, this. Okay, I know where this is coming from. So Pokemon, as I said it, Pokemon, Pokemon. Oh yeah, okay, I see. Yeah, Pokemon. Or some people say, which all of these people are of older generations, Pokemon, which I don't know why they do that because there's not even an A in it. That doesn't make any sense at all. But some older people will say it that way, Pokemon. So I usually say Pokemon. Actually, I pretty much always say Pokemon. Pokemon, I think, is also something that's maybe said by people who are a little older. In my experience, I don't really hear people say like my generation or younger saying it that way. And then Pokemon, that is an alternative that does sometimes happen because we see the accent on the E. And so the natural thing we want to do, we know it's po, and that's stressed, which means that the K, if it's supposed to be a K, right, the K plus E combination, it would probably be reduced to a schwa. So using our internal database of how things would probably be pronounced, we really, like most people would want to reduce it to a schwa. We say Pokemon, and that's how I think the majority of people say it. But because there's that accent mark there, it also kind of makes us want to double think that and say, okay, maybe it's not reduced to a schwa. Maybe we should actually say K instead, because we don't use accent marks, but we're like, there's this special thing here, so maybe we should say it differently instead of reducing it to a schwa. Okay, so both of those are fine. You'll hear both, but I think the most common is Pokemon, and that's how I say it. Although I think in the show, like when they say Pokemon, I think they say actually K, like Pokemon. And so that's probably how it's like supposed to be pronounced in English, but we just reduce it. Bonus question: how come the electric mouse is Pikachu and not Pikachu? Wait, oh, Pikachu. Why would it be Pikachu? What does pick have to do with electricity or mouses? Mice. See, I made a mistake too. um, I swear in the future, like mice is not going to exist. We're just going to say mouse, like mouses. Um, that's not really something that's changing necessarily, but it feels like something that might start changing or that may be starting to change. Uh, so I don't know. But Pikachu. Actually, I'm pretty sure it has something to do with Japanese. Oh yeah, that's right. See here, Pika, Japanese onomatopoeia, which I don't know how to spell. Um, onomatopoeia, yes. Okay, so yeah, I learned this a while ago, and I almost forgot it. So in um, Japanese, one of the really cool things about Japanese is that so there's this thing called onomatopoeia. That's what we call it in English, onomatopoeia. Don't even worry about how to spell it. It's a stupid word that I don't even know how to spell. I have to look it up. But what that means is uh, when we make a word based on a sound. So like buzz, right? Zzz, like you have a bee or a fly flying around and you hear zzz. We say that the um, the the bee is buzzing. So that's the word. That's the onomatopoeia for that sound. Buzz. Okay. Japanese has onomatopoeia for so many things, and not just for sounds. They have onomatopoeia for I think it's like certain thoughts and certain like smells and certain tastes. It's crazy. It's ridiculous. And it's really really cool and interesting. Um, but if I remember right, I don't see it on this list. If I remember right, pika is onomatopoeia for electricity. So it's like the sound of electricity or something. Japanese, it means okay. Oh no, it means shiny or sparkly. That's it. It means shiny or sparkly. So when we say pika, that's a Japanese word for something that is shiny or sparkly. So it's an onomatopoeia for visual things, not for a sound. Um, and so that's where Pikachu got its name. Um, in this case, obviously electricity, shiny, sparkly because of the electricity. And I'm reading this thing here, chew. Okay, so chew apparently in Japanese is the sound that a mouse makes. I didn't know that. I just found that here when I was looking it up. So it's literally like sparkly mouse, kind of. That would be like a rough literal translation of Pikachu. So that's why. There you go. And why isn't so maybe that's why you're asking why isn't it pick? But in English, at least the way that I'm reading it right, that would be eh. But in Japanese, right, the animal, the Pokemon, pronounces its name Pika. So we're not going to say Pika. Maybe some people will do that for some reason because they see the I, but um, right, if we hear it pronounced a particular way, we often tend to want to try to pronounce it that way within boundaries, certain limitations. But so that's just the name of the Pokemon. Anyway, uh, because we try to pronounce it close to the Japanese. It's just exactly what I was saying, right? So that's a secondary explanation. But yes, that would be for why we say it that way in English. Anyway, got it, sir. Thank you. No problem. Would you say Ivorobotnik? Oh yeah, or Evo Robotnik? I think somebody's been playing too much Sonic. Or you just call Sonic's arch nemesis Dr. Eggman. um, yeah, so actually, I don't know if this is just what I do or if it's because I know Dr. Eggman is very common. And I know his name is, I think it's supposed to be Evo. I think most people would say Evo. It really doesn't matter. Like, I don't think we really care. Like Evo, Ivo, whatever. But Robotnik, yes. Um, so that doesn't matter. But actually, what I always called him, and I don't know if this is just me, I always called him Dr. Robotnik because he's a doctor and his last name is Robotnik. And for whatever reason, I don't know if I heard it that way or what, but I say Dr. Robotnik. So maybe I'm just weird. I don't know, Pokemon, yeah. Pokemon, yeah. You know, Pokemon. Pokemon. Moan. Okay, because I see the O. That sounds weird now. Okay, Theris, I was about to say that I hear day being said as, oh god, the IPA. Is that supposed to be a J? IPA J? Or is it, oh no, I guess that's an IPA E sound. So being pronounced as like D, D, more than day. How does it sound to you, the first version? So if I'm reading that right, I'm pretty sure. So you have the D, the I, like it, which is stupidly called the short I, and then the E, which is stupidly called the long E. Horrible terminology that is very misleading. Um, yes, and then the second one, right? So yeah, I get I from bit. Yeah, so it as in it or bit. But then that last character in the first version, that's the E sound, right? Like eat. Because I think that's it, with how the text is rendering on my screen, I'm pretty sure it looks like a lowercase I, which would be the IPA for E. Um, but I just want to confirm that because it's like super, super tiny for some reason. But it's if I try to say it that way, it sounds very strange. D, 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 the other D. Let's see, the other day, the day, the day. What you're probably hearing, it's not that. A second ago, I was talking about cutting diphthongs, and you can do that with A also. So we have the A diphthong. I'm not writing it in IPA because I don't use IPA and I don't recommend IPA. But the A diphthong, right? What can very commonly happen, even in stressed words, for A, if we're speaking quickly, if you're enunciating, you're speaking a little bit clearly, then we're probably not going to cut it. But if you're speaking quickly, like the other day, day, I'll either just completely drop that I at the end, or I will kind of start moving a little bit to it without actually getting into that full sound. And so I don't actually say like at the end of the day, at the end of the day, or the other day, at the end of the day, end of the day, day. So you're not really hearing it go like day. day, that would be at the end of it. Um, I assume that's probably what you're hearing. Maybe there's some dialects. I can't imagine that anybody would say it in the first version, um, unless maybe they're there's something special we can do. It's not part of normal speech. But if we really want to exaggerate and emphasize, and I think this is a millennial thing, I haven't really heard anybody older do this, and Gen Z probably does it too, but um, where for some words sometimes we'll give special emphasis where we say like say something like sick meaning really cool, right? Instead of saying sick, like sick, sick. Like we say it this sort of like special way to like kind of emphasize it, and it's a weird thing that we can do sometimes with some words. And maybe if somebody said day that way, like oh yeah, it was a really good day. Like I can't imagine why somebody would do it there with that word, but that's the only way that you might hear sort of like the first version. So technically it could happen, but it's definitely not going to be the normal way that we say it. That's a good question. It sounds a bit different. Yeah. So you can cut the diphthong or partially cut the diphthong, but the first version I would say doesn't exist, unless maybe it's a different dialect. Okay, and we ran out of questions. Oh, Steve has joined us right at the perfect time. I'm glad to see you this time, Steve, since you missed the last one. I think it was the last one. If you'd say that ain't happening, would you be supposed to say that or that? Okay, so I know where this is coming from. For people who don't know the background here, um, I know Steve likes to listen to a lot of like hip hop and rap type style music, and a lot of the people who make that kind of music have a different way to do the th, which is as a regular d. And this is not part of standard English. This is not part of General American English. It's perfectly fine. It exists, but it will sound more informal and or uneducated. So that's the background there, so everybody knows kind of what's going on here. But no, Steve, the answer is no. If somebody has that dialect or that way of speaking where they do replace the th with a normal d, then that's how they would say it. But me, right, I don't speak that way normally. So we do a dental d, which is always, well, relatively always possible for the th. I'm thinking at the end of the word. It's not necessarily always, but for the word that, it can always be replaced by a dental d. So instead of saying dat, like dat ain't happening. Like that sounds really informal, kind of uneducated. But if you do a dental d, that ain't happening. That ain't happening. Perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it because that's part of the standard General American variation of the th sound. Okay. And I know you're probably asking because like ain't is very informal. It's improper grammar. You're never supposed to say, right? Ain't a word, as my second grade teacher liked to say. And so you're probably thinking, well, could I just use that D? In standard American English or General American English, regardless of the exact variation of the dialect, like Western American, Upper Midland, whatever, where we all speak neutrally, that D, a normal D, will never replace a TH. It doesn't matter if you're speaking really informally, it doesn't matter ever, unless you're intentionally trying to sound uneducated or you're trying to mimic like the way that those people talk, then you could do it. Like if I say, "Dad ain't happening," "Dad ain't happening," right? Then somebody might choose to do that. But that's kind of how it sounds from the general American perspective. Again, I'm not saying that it's stupid or that it's wrong. It's just that's the perception within general American English. For speakers who don't do that with the th, they don't replace it with a normal d. So it doesn't really matter how informal something is. For a speaker of general American English that doesn't use that d there, you can replace it with a dental d, but that's it. Okay, the formality doesn't affect whether or not we could change it into a normal D. That's a dialect thing, not a formality thing. So diphthongs or diphthong. Okay, so diphthongs are vowels that already exist, right? If you separate the first vowel in A and the second vowel, I don't hear the first vowel is the same as the word from bed, for example. Okay, this is a good question. No, so in English, right? So we have four diphthongs. Four diphthongs. And I know some sources, some teachers say that there's more than that and whatever. It really doesn't matter. There's four diphthongs. If you count the R-colored vowels and the L-colored vowels, then you can also classify those as diphthongs. Technically, they are, but if we're not counting the R, not counting the L, there's really only four diphthongs in American English, and that would be A, I, ow. How do I spell ow? I with a W. Ow, which phonetically, you can find the English Hacks phonetic transcription in the description below this video, but the phonetic way that I transcribe it using the English Hacks method, not the IPA, is OW, but the start of ow uses the same sound as the start of I. And then oi, okay? These are the four diphthongs we have. Now, for A and I, the start of the diphthong only exists in the diphthong. Okay. And the end of the diphthong is I. Sounds kind of like E, but it's I, like an it. Okay, so the end of the diphthong is an individual vowel sound, but the start of those two diphthongs only exist in the diphthongs. Okay. For ow, again, the start of ow is the same as the start of I, so that only exists in that diphthong. And the end of ow, technically it's what I call the high schwa, with lips coming around. So it sounds a lot like an oo, but if I say ow, ow, that doesn't sound quite right. Usually when we do the lips don't round around. They might come out like up a little bit. We say ooh, ooh. A fast way to say ooh would be ooh, ooh. We don't bring it all the way around, but clearly enunciated, the lips have to really move ooh, ooh, you, okay? But in the diphthong, ow, ow, see, and it doesn't have to be that much necessarily, but they do come around, okay? Except we're not, with the tongue, we don't go into the ooh sound, we go into the sound. So we're combining position with the rounded lips after the ah starting. And so technically, the end of the ow diphthong does exist as an individual sound for but never has the lips rounding by itself. And so it's sort of a special combination between the lips and the tongue that only exists in the ow diphthong. So technically, the ow diphthong is like two sounds that otherwise don't exist as individual sounds in the language. And then oi, there are two ways to say this within general American English. People from the West, which still sounds neutral either way, it's a very small variation. People from the West, like me, we'll do O plus E. Again, it sounds kind of like E, but it's I. It ends in I. I will say oi, oi. People from probably the middle of the country, maybe the East Coast, who also speak general American English, not some other special dialect, they will use aw if they don't have the cot merger. Because the reason we say oi instead of oi is because we have most people in the West and increasingly a lot of people across the country now have the cot merger where and aw become ah. And so what happens with oi, since aw no longer exists in the merger, it gets replaced by o. So we get oi, oi. And however you want to do it is fine. It doesn't matter. They both sound natural. They both sound neutral. You can do whichever one's easier. The way I speak and the way I teach is with the O version. So oi, oi, oi. So the start is O, which does exist as an individual sound. The end is I, which does exist as an individual sound. So only oi has both parts as separate sounds that come together as well, separate sounds that exist by themselves and come together to form a blended sound, where a, I, and ow are have at least one sound that doesn't exist by itself as an individual sound. So very good question. Very, very good question. And the difference between and the start of like eh, a, a, eh, 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 a, it can be really hard to hear the difference between because there's a very slight difference there. But there is a difference. Is the individual vowel sound. Is the start of a. It even sounds weird in isolation by itself. Like I couldn't do that before. Like Cedant was asking me about it a long time ago, and I had to kind of try to isolate it. So now I can do it a bit better. But we never say like by itself. It's always the start of the diphthong. Okay, I've heard some people really draw out the word by. Yeah, like, bye. Yeah, that's a special case. And in that case, they're manipulating it in a special way and going all the way up into E and drawing out the sound. It's a special case. It's not part of the normal way to say bye. Yeah. I think they're asking the difference between the first sound of the diphthong A and the short I. Could be. I don't know, but I explained all that. Well, actually, I guess I didn't explain that. So for anybody who's who might be not sure about that, I think Cedant was asking about that before. So also in the link, there's a link, or in the description, there's a link to my download page, jjanuaryauthor.com/downloads, and you'll find the vowel charts, the English text vowel charts. And if you look on the diphthong chart, you'll see the placement for the start of A and the placement for I. And so they're right? We have individual sounds. The E is way up here, the I is a little lower, the E is a little lower. And then the start of A is sort of somewhere between the second one, I, and the third one, E. And then we move from that point up into I, A. So the difference is, right, because depending on your language and the current state of your ears, instead of hearing the difference between and the start of A, it can be difficult to hear the difference between the start of A and the end of, right, the I sound. So the vowel charts help you kind of visualize what's going on there and can help your ears start to sort that out a bit. But how do normal people in the US say common wine names without coming off as pretentious? I'm thinking of, I see, yeah. So without coming off as pretentious. So like trying to say it in a fancy way that, matches, the French or the German pronunciation or wherever it came from. Yeah. So for a lot of these, part of the pronunciation has just kind of been adopted because especially if it's from French origin, like we have many French words. In fact, like half of English vocabulary is French, of French origin, literally. And we have words like buffet, buffet, right? Which there's no T there, right? And I don't know the exact way that's pronounced in French, but the T is silent in French, I assume. And so we say buffet, like it's not a stop T, it's spelled with the T because that's how the French spell it, I guess. And we adopted the spelling, we approximated the pronunciation, and we left the T off. Okay. So we're already used to that from French sources. And even if technically it's not a French source, but it seems like maybe it could follow the same rule, we might follow that. So for Pinot Grigio, no T, completely not a stop, no nothing. We just ignore the T. Pinot Grigio. Okay. We don't say like Pinot Grigio. We're not gonna that would maybe sound more pretentious or whatever. But Pinot Grigio, Cabernet, which we'll usually say Cabernet, right? If it's really clear, like I'll have the Cabernet. But Cabernet, instead of trying to say Sauvignon or something, would say Sauvignon. Sauvignon. Some people will say Sauvignon or something like that. Maybe get a little bit of that difference, but if they don't want to sound fancy or potentially pretentious, then we'll just say Sauvignon, Cabernet Sauvignon. And yeah, same thing, Blanc, right? Instead of Blanc or whatever, I don't know how they would say it, but Sauvignon Blanc, Blanc. Riesling, I don't even know how that would be pronounced otherwise, Riesling. And Merlot. So again, we ignore the T. Yeah, so Riesling, Merlot. I think the Riesling may optionally have a Z instead of an S, like Riesling. I think some people say it that way, but yeah. Because that's the same letter that appears in Cambridge Dictionary at bed like day. Okay. So back to that question right quick. Cambridge. One thing, so if you're learning American English, I don't recommend the Cambridge Dictionary. Um, well, number one, if you're learning pronunciation, the dictionary is not the best source. It can be useful for some things, but the dictionary is not the best source of pronunciation information. Um, but especially if you're learning American English, the Cambridge Dictionary or any other British-based dictionary, um, in my experience, because I've looked at many different dictionaries and I've used several of them for various reasons. And in my experience with the Cambridge Dictionary, sometimes even for the IPA transcription that they put for the American English, it's it's not right. um, so I don't know, but let's see if we do what was the word day or bed? Yeah, bed. Do bed, and if we do day, let's see. Um, yeah, see, so that can be confusing because it's between the brackets, and you can see from other words like day that they are using IPA symbols. Uh, and I don't know about the British pronunciation. Maybe it's different, but in American English for sure, I can tell you 100% that bed and day do not use the same vowel sound. One uses and the other uses, I guess, a. It's hard for me to isolate it because we don't isolate it, but the start of a, right? So this is an example where this is just completely wrong. And they're also, as I said, they're trying to use IPA, and it's wrong even in IPA. So I definitely don't recommend the Cambridge Dictionary for pronunciation, especially for American pronunciation. Um, yeah, that's very confusing. I have no idea why they did that. Can the vowel in ing sound like a schwa in fast speech? Wait. Oh, okay. So if we say like walking, for example, um, walk, walking, walking, walking here, walking here. I'm gonna say no. Walking. If you reduce walking to the more informal walking, which we very commonly do, even though it is more informal, like we'll still use it in a lot of situations. It doesn't have to be like necessarily an informal situation, but um, if you do that one, that's supposed to be right? That like an it or in. Um, that you could reduce to a schwa, walking, walking. Instead of walking, 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 walking here. Right? That's fine. But for the ing, if it's supposed to be the not the reduced one, just the normal ing ending, it sounds weird to me. No. Even in fast speech. No. Maybe some people do it. I don't know, but I would say no. Thank you for the answers. Have a wonderful week. I'm going to call it an early night. I'm too tired. Take care, everyone. Enjoy the session. Yes. Sorry, it took me a second to get to this comment here, but thank you very much for stopping by. Glad I could help, and hope to see you next week. But yes, Steve is both fine to pronounce of them, dropping the V before the TH, right? Is I don't know, you're saying both fine. So it's fine to pronounce of them dropping the V sound. Yeah, so the V and of, right? So of course I always have to mention this because everybody is aware. Of is spelled with an O and an F, but there's no O and there's no F. It's which is a schwa sound, plus a V. So the because of is a super common function word, grammar word, it very commonly drops the V. We won't always do that, especially if there's a vowel after it. It's actually really nice to just like link the V into the the vowel sound and kind of helps us flow better. And there's some other cases where we might not drop it because it makes it a little bit more difficult to speak. But in general, that V very, very commonly drops. And so, especially if there's like a TH after it, right? Well, with them, I also probably reduce them to. So in that, see, this is a good case where it might depend. So like if I said of the sky, the color of the sky, of the color of the sky, color of the sky, drop that V, no problem, perfect speech. But in of and them will very commonly reduce to right? So in that case, if we drop the V and then we have we're going from to which can happen if one is stressed and one is not, right? We have that upside down V, the not true schwa, as I call it. So like or like the other, right? We have a true schwa, the, and then we have that upside down V, not true schwa, in other. So the other, right? Because now we can just keep going higher and that works fine, even though they're next to each other. But with of and them, we would be left like if you try to say of them, like let's see, I don't know, a sentence here, something of them, the color of them. I like the color of them, right? Like say some beads on a necklace or bracelet or something, right? If you say I like the color of them, the color of them. You could do that if you keep the th. Okay, but what we're probably more likely to do in this case is actually keep the v on of, drop the th on them, and reduce that to and say of them, of them. That's going to be much more common. So I like the color of them, color of them. So possible, but most likely we'd actually keep the v and drop the th in this particular case. Fin, isn't the first vowel in ow the same one as an apple? No, it is not. It sounds pretty different from I to me. Yeah, this is a common concern that a lot of people bring up. Like they say it sounds different. And there's a reason for that. Interesting. Thank you. You're welcome. The first sound in I sounds like an unmerged sound. Yeah. Okay. Good. I don't know the exact IPA symbols here because I know there's like two very similar A symbols. Let me actually hold on. jwauthor.com/downloads. Load. Better load. There we go. Okay. My vowel charts. Yeah. And then if we go American. Okay. Vowel chart. I just want to double check with the IPA symbols that they use for, yeah, okay. Wait, oh, that's California. General American. General. This is weird. Very weird. Okay. Oh, I see. There it is. Okay, yeah, so it is a different symbol in IPA. Anyway, whatever. The thing here. So the unmerged sound, like in hot, is a bit farther back than the start of the diphthong I and ow. And the sound is a bit farther forward. Okay. All three of these sounds are very open, right? So they're right, very in the bottom. But the uses the front part of the tongue. The start of I and ow also uses the front of the tongue, but in a slightly different way and a little farther back. And then the unmerged uses sort of like the middle to the back of the tongue. I always imagine it as being the middle because I can reproduce it if I think of the middle of the tongue. But on the vowel chart I just looked at, it looked like it's farther back. And then uses the back of the tongue, the merged but regardless, they're not the same. And I've played with this a lot because people have asked me about this, and I always double check. So if I try to say, for example, cow, oops, that's cow. Um, if I try to do that with an ah sound or with the unmerged ah sound, okay, we'll do both here. Um, so if I say ah, right, cow, 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 there's probably some people who say it that way, but that sounds very exaggerated. Like it's like, why are you pushing that so far forward? Cow. Or if I just say cow, cow, cow. It's very similar to ah, but it's not ah. It's not exactly the same. And then if I try to do with the unmerged ah, say I think it's ah. I think that's it. Like cow, cow. Obviously, that almost sounds kind of British to me in a way. Um, Now there is also a bit of variation in the exact way that we could do it, and we can speak a little more lazily and whatever. But for the like the clear enunciated sound, how like it should be, um, it's not in ow, it's not ah. Okay, very close to ah, but it's not ah. In I, same thing, right? So if I say, we'll keep a minimal pair here. So cow, kai, kai. So if I say ka, cow, kai, cow, kai, basically the same. However, there is a little bit of a difference. If you have good ears, you probably notice that difference. That little bit of a difference is because it's a diphthong, okay? And because it's a diphthong, we're not saying like ah, I, or ah, ooh, or something like that. As soon as you start making that sound from the starting position, it immediately starts moving into the second position. And because of that, that is going to create a little bit of a different sound where if we go from ah to I, we're going from down here to up here. I, right? I, I, I. Where if I do from ah to the with the lips rounded, okay, now I have to go from this position down here up into the while bringing my lips around, and the lips will cause extra interference in the sound, but especially this is a very drastic shift instead of just going up to right? So that aside from the start of I and ow, see in the I version, because you said okay, so you said ow would be the same as apple. Ow, ow, ow. I guess that doesn't quite explain why it would sound like the an apple, but the sound itself, the ah sound itself, not ah, the start of the diphthong. I can't. It's hard to do in isolation, but the start of the diphthong I and ow is very close to ah. I don't know why the start of I seems sort of like the unmerged ah to you because those are in worlds apart. Maybe there are some people who say it that way. Maybe they get really lazy with it. And so it could be like a variation. Actually, see, because I was thinking about that recently. Uh, I. Yeah, actually, I guess we'll have to talk very briefly about this. Again, so I was talking about the clear sound, like the fully enunciated sound, not lazy. The way that it's supposed to be, and that it will, it's supposed to come out. I was going to say commonly come out, but that kind of depends. They're the same. Regardless, what can happen, and there's probably some difference between the I and the ow here also because of what we would do in the mouth going between the sounds. But what I've noticed is that there's not actually just one perfect way to do the I and the ow, especially I, where like I wouldn't go all the way to ah. Like I wouldn't say like I. That sounds like almost maybe kind of Australian or something to me. Like it doesn't quite sound like American English. But if I go maybe as far back as ah and hot, the unmerged ah, and I say like I. It sounds okay. And so maybe in like really fast speech or really lazy speech, it could happen that way. It could happen that way. I don't think there's necessarily like a 100% perfect way to hit the start of that diphthong. And if I go back and I try to do ow like that, ow, 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 it still sounds okay, starting from that unmerged ah sound. Ah, or unmerged ah, ah, ow, 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 I. It's fine. Um, so I think you hearing ah is just a bit of an illusion because they are very close and they do sound very similar if we were to isolate the start of the diphthongs. Um, but the reason why you might be hearing some ah, the unmerged version, could be because it's actually like a variation, like a little bit of a lazier way to do it. That still sounds fine. Um, okay, does the sentence would you open the window to air the room out for a little bit sound natural to you? Would you open the window to air the room out for a little bit? No, it sounds perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Uh, I would think now this doesn't sound in any way unnatural, but I think it might be a tiny bit more common to say could you instead of would you. Because would still sounds perfectly polite, but could just it kind of makes it sound like a little bit more nice, I guess, in a way. Yeah, which is a very subtle distinction, very very small, but yes, there's nothing wrong with that. Forgot about my drink again. I always do that. Okay, have you tried the Pimsleur method? Yes, for multiple languages. And if so, what are your thoughts on it? I know I'm not getting paid for this comment. Nice. Um, so actually, I wanted to do like for this channel. I'm going to do it on my other channel at some point, but I wanted to do like a review on this channel for Pimsleur, but I don't think they have any like for English learners because it's usually like based on English for other languages, so it doesn't apply for this channel. But yes, I've used Pimsleur for Spanish, for Japanese, for German. Um, I did the first lesson in French because the first lesson is always like a free demo that you can download, and that's how I know how to and can quite accurately or quite well pronounce the sentence "Je ne comprends pas le français" just from that first lesson. I remember it. Right? I don't understand French. Je ne comprends pas le français. And whenever I speak to the rare occasions when I get a French student like who's learning English, I say that's the only thing I know how to say in French, aside from a couple numbers. And they're like, "Oh, your pronunciation is very good." I'm like, "Well, thank you." But anyway, the Pimsleur method. Again, this I don't think this necessarily applies to you guys because I don't think they have versions for English learners. But if you want to learn another language, I'll briefly talk about this here really quick. The Pimsleur method is it's part of what we call the audiolingual method, where there's lots of like listening and repeating and all this stuff. And they have special exercises. You're not just like straight repeating everything. There's like different exercises and different things. And through the course, it switches from like primarily in English to primarily in the foreign language. So, like the instructions at first are in English, and then say you're doing Spanish. So like through the course, more and more of the instructions will go to Spanish until like pretty much everything at the end is in Spanish. The instructions, the exercises, everything. Um, so it's a generally good approach. I like their courses. I do think that they are useful to like when you're starting the language. They're not, of course, they're not required. I don't think they're necessarily like the best or anything, but they're one very good useful tool that can get you going in a language, especially with the listening part. Um, but I think that it's one tool. Like they could, right, because they say, speak a language in 10 minutes, like that's their whole thing, because like by the end of the first lesson they have you be able to say a sentence, and so technically it's not wrong, but I think it's deceptive marketing. um, if you just did the Pimsleur course, you're not going to be a speaker of that language, you're not going to be fluent in any way. You will know how to say quite a few things, you will be quite used to the basics of the language, and so it, as I said, especially as a beginner, it can be very very useful. But it's one tool, and I would recommend that you use that as one tool in addition to other things that you would do, and just kind of go like through one lesson a day, basically. What I actually did when I was doing Spanish, and I was teaching myself Spanish. I got the Pimsleur for Spanish, and I would listen to the lesson in the morning, and then I would repeat the same lesson at night. Um, it was either that, I don't remember which one I did. I either did that or I did like a new lesson in the evening and then repeated it in the morning. Because when you bracket your day like that for learning, it's super, super useful for your brain, and helps you learn easier in my experience. But either way, regardless of the exact thing, if you have one in the morning and one in the evening where it's repeating, not like a new one each time, then that can be super, super useful. So I did that process for every lesson until I reached the end of the course. And I learned quite a bit from it. But I was nowhere near, uh, like I couldn't understand normal speech yet. I could start to pick some things out. I definitely had like no conversational ability at all, because speaking is its own skill, and they have you repeat things, but you don't really have a whole lot of like actual conversation practice. Like they do say, how would you say blah blah blah, but then you're kind of just translating, right? You're not actually trying to like speak the language from within yourself, and so you don't really get a lot of that, and so that skill doesn't get practiced. So that's the big weak point of it. But again, it's only one tool, so yeah. But I do like it. What sound is tut tut supposed to capture in written language? Uh, yeah, this is a schwa, tut tut. Um, so what would ow sound like if you were to say it more lazily? Well, kind of like it did, like ow, 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 ah, 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 ow. Yeah, and there's probably a little bit of variation here and there, but that's what I would imagine. Yeah. If I'm just kind of like really relaxed, I'm not trying to say like ow, ow, then my tongue would just kind of be maybe a little more relaxed. Um, yeah, pronounce, and sound is hard because you have to nasalize the first part of the auditive tongue. Pronounce, pronounce. Ow, ow, pronounce. No, I'm not sure where you heard that. That is definitely not true. Um, because if you did that, then it would be a nasal vowel, and at least officially, English doesn't have nasal vowels. I see C is here and has a retracted message. But welcome C. Um, yeah, so if I say pronounce, there could be a little bit, especially because it's bracketed by ends, like I'm leaving an N going back into an N. There can be a little bit of nasality that happens, um, naturally and commonly as a side effect, but you don't have to nasalize it. You just try to say ow. As long as you say a nice, good ow sound, that's all that's required. Um, if it happens to come out a little nasally, which it probably will do, in sound, there's an N after it, and so we're sort of preparing for that N. That's part of why the ah, like I've talked about this before, the ah in cat and the an or the ah in man and the I can't speak, guys, in mat and man, right? It does sound a little bit different. But the main reason why it sounds a little bit different is because when we go to that N, we're preparing for that nasalization. And I think that generally happens with vowels where there might be a little bit of slight nasalization that we don't really notice very much, because we're preparing for the N or the M or whatever. Uh, but it's still ah, like it's still the same sound. It's just there's a little bit of interference because of the sounds around it. And that's one of the problems with trying to break everything down into like super discrete individual parts is like that may generally be true, but depending on what's around certain sounds, you might get slight little interferences or weird things that happen that make it sound a little different, even though it actually is the same thing. Or it would at least be within an acceptable range, especially for vowel sounds. It's within an acceptable range of what a native would interpret as the proper sound. Um, so yeah, that's what I would say about that. But you definitely don't have to nasalize the first part of ow or any part of ow when you're saying pronounce or sound. I should note my questions. I forget everything in seconds. Probably. um, I kind of have that problem too sometimes. Um, so, is this a fine pronunciation for the phrase "Where have you been"? Where you been? Sorry if I didn't describe the sentence well. That's okay. So if I were to transcribe it using the English text method, and I won't pay attention to the stress here since we're focused on the sounds, but where view where view been? So it looks something like this. So and this is why Y is considered sort of a semi-vowel because consonants can still connect to it, and that's fine. But I still teach it as a consonant sound. It's a special case. But anyway, where view, so view just like view. And then bin, so you could say ben. Sometimes we might say ben, but in American English, BEEN, like where have you been? We don't say bean. We don't usually say ben. It's possible it could come out that way, but we think of it as bin with I. So that's how I would transcribe it. Where have you been? Where have you been? And yeah, because we're contracting, if you don't contract have, which we probably would, then that would not be accurate because it would be either dropping the H or keeping the H. Where have you been? Or where have, art av, where have. But if you contract where and have, then yes, where have you been? Are Americans generally used to accents of countries such as UK, Canada, and Australia? I was arguing with a friend about it and would like to make sure I was right. And would like, yeah. So quick grammar note here. So you corrected yourself and said, and I would. So you already said I was arguing with a friend about it, and would you don't have to repeat the subject because you're not changing subjects. So you don't need the second I there. You can add it. There's nothing wrong with it, but that's you corrected a thing that was not a mistake. But anyway, so are Americans in general used to accents from UK, Canada, Australia? Uh, yes. The Canadian accent, I mean, there are some Canadians who have what we would call a Canadian accent because of the way certain sounds are changed, but a lot of Canadians sound either exactly like us or almost exactly like us. Um, and so sometimes people from Canada, we don't even know, like we don't even notice that they're from Canada. But if they do have more of that sort of Canadian sound, or they're from the UK, there's a couple. I mean, there's a lot of British accents. Like you don't even know. There's a lot. But the two biggest ones that we tend to hear in the media and stuff is the proper received pronunciation and Cockney or something similar to Cockney, which is, I guess, kind of more of an informal sounding dialect or pronunciation pattern. But it's just there are people who speak that way. Certain things just work differently there. And so for those two in the UK, yes, we're used to them. We very rarely have any problems understanding the pronunciation. Sometimes the words we may not know because they might use certain phrases or terminology that or vocabulary that we don't know, but it's like very very small. Like we don't really have any problems. There are some people from the UK with certain accents that are a lot harder to understand, so that can happen. But in general, no. And Australia, like no problems. Again, maybe they use words a little bit differently, but for the pronunciation, we don't usually have many problems. No. Even Indian English, like people from India who may or may not be native speakers, but especially if they're native speakers of English and they grew up with like an Indian accent, um, a lot of the time we don't really have much problems understanding them. That might be a little bit more difficult, but even then, like we're kind of used to that too, because there's quite a lot of people with an Indian accent. So Yeah, not a problem. So I hope I proved you right instead of wrong. But see, but N, M, and N, I didn't mean the NG, change the vowels before it. They do not. That's probably something that other teachers teach that I disagree with. Um, any sort of change that might happen is maybe not 100%, but I would say is like 95 to 99% an illusion. Um, right? So if I say E, right, E, 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 try going to N, een, een, E, E, een, een. I'm doing exactly the same vowel sound in exactly the same way, except now after I finish the E, I bring my tongue up into the N. Now, as I'm transitioning from the E to the N, this might get a little weak as we prepare the flap in the back, right? That leads to the nose. That might get a little bit weak, start to kind of open a little bit because we're preparing for the N. And then as we go into the N, obviously the flow of the air through the mouth is closed. And so all of it goes through the nose and we hear the N sound. So the change to the E sound actually isn't a change to the E sound, especially in fast speech. It creates the illusion that the E is different, but it's not. It's exactly the same sound. The only difference is that as we move from E to N, we get this little bit of interference as this back flap starts to open. Okay. Just like with the diphthongs, as I said, as soon as you start the diphthong, you immediately start moving into the next sound. And so with like I and ow, they can actually sound a little bit different at the starting position because they immediately start switching into two different positions. Um, there are I don't know how long you've been following the channel, Finn, but there's lots of things that I haven't even talked about on the channel yet. But I actually have a playlist called "Forget This" that I think it only has like 2 or 3 videos right now. But there are certain things that other teachers teach, or the way that they teach, that I really, really either disagree with what they're teaching, or more commonly, I disagree with the way that they're teaching it, even if it's technically accurate. And there are some things that are illusions that it seems most teachers aren't even aware of. And there was an example of that recently that I could bring up here, but I can't remember it right now. What was that? Yeah, I can't remember right now. But sometimes there's things based on the how sounds are flowing, or certain things that are going on in the mouth that create the illusion that something special is happening in terms of like what the sounds themselves are doing, but it actually isn't. Like there is no oh yeah, so like what was it? It's right there, come on, what was that example? Oh yes, so vowel length, right? Which this particular point I don't think I mentioned. It would be a good example to have included, but I already published the video a while ago. In the Forget This playlist, there's a video talking about length, and there's actually like 1 or 2 reasons that I wasn't even aware of when I made that video. So I actually have a couple more reasons of why I don't like that idea in English. So you can watch that video for some information on that. But it's very commonly taught that, for example, if I say kid or I say kit, what most teachers will tell you is that the vowel sound in the second word is shorter and the vowel sound in the first word is longer. And this is absolutely an illusion. Okay. Even if in reality, like say you like measure the milliseconds of how long it takes, even if there is a little bit of difference, it's still going to be an illusion. And I'm going to tell you why. In kit, not jit, in kit, obviously we could have that T sound there, right? Kit, kit, kit. Often it's going to be stopped. Kit, kit. Um, But regardless, that T is voiceless, and especially if it's stopped, it's really going to sound like it cuts off that vowel. Kit, kit. So the vowel doesn't have as much time to be heard. Okay. Um, but I'm not trying to make it any longer or shorter. I'm not trying to say like super short, like kit, kit, kit. No. Where with kid, K-I-D, okay, because both these words would be stressed, right? The stress determines the vowel length or the syllable length, which is essentially the vowel length. But the stress determines the syllable length, not the sounds or the sounds around them. So if I say kid, okay, now whether I stop the D or not, but especially if I stop the D is voiced. And so what happens is all vowels are voiced. And so if we go, I basically get to hold that I just what seems to be a little bit longer because the voice is going to carry over into the D. But I'm not actually going to make the vowel or the syllable any longer or shorter. It's an illusion caused by the presence or lack of the voice in the T or the D. So these are the same length. Kit, kid, kit, kid. Okay. Um, Part of that illusion is that as we prepare to go into that voicelessness in kit, that the voice of the vowel does start to drop, where it continues straight through in the D. But the distance between the I and the T and the I and the D is the same. The vowel itself isn't any longer or shorter. Okay. And let's go ahead and say, let's say I'm completely wrong about this, and let's say there is a difference. It wouldn't matter. And the reason why it wouldn't matter is because if we're talking about length, if one is shorter, then it should always be that kit would be said, even if it's stressed, it would be said super, super short, like kit, kit, kit. Do you have the kit? And then kid would always be pronounced longer. Like, do you have the kid? Do you have the kid? Kid? Like, I would intentionally have to lengthen the word just a little bit. And that's not how we speak. So, this whole concept of saying it's shorter or longer, aside from my belief that it's inaccurate, even if it is accurate, I think that it's a very, very horrible way to teach it because, especially if your native language makes a difference between the same vowel, longer and shorter, like in Hindi, it's going to make you believe that you need to say one word really short, even if it's stressed, and the other word really long, even if it's stressed, when that's not how English works at all. Okay. So, uh, anyway, back to the point here. NM and do not change the vowels before them. It can cause a little bit of interference, just like any sound, right? If there's a T after, if there's an SH after, if there's an R, well, R would probably be a vowel if it's after. Whatever it is, depending on like how your tongue is flowing in your mouth, you're going to get like it's going to sound different going from say to than it is going from to k, right? N, ek, n, ek. There's a little bit of a different sound. And we don't care about that little bit of a different sound because it doesn't actually make enough of a difference in the sound itself for it to be a different sound. Okay. So any little tiny difference that you hear is either an illusion or it just doesn't matter. Right. Anyway, that's my point on that. I could be completely wrong. But what is the biggest audible difference between the way people with southern accents say words like ran or dance and those without the southern drawl? Good question. Well, I'm not an absolute expert on this, but if I were to try to speak with more of a southern accent, I ran down the street. I ran down the street. Which there's a variety of southern accents. So I mean, this isn't necessarily going to answer, how all people from the South speak, but you want to dance, dance, ran, dance, dance, ran. I ran down the street. I ran as I danced. I ran as I danced. They might be hitting more or less the same thing, but I'm hearing a little bit of a difference between them, just between these two words. But obviously, that's quite different compared to ran and dance. It's close, but has a little bit of a drawl to it, right? Um, when someone is having a breakdown, not breaking down, breakdown, what does that mean? That is a very bad thing. So a breakdown is short for a mental breakdown. And that basically means when you are under so much stress that your brain basically just shuts down and you can't handle anything. Like you know, and your exact reaction, is might differ depending on what's going on. But usually you're probably gonna have to like sit down, like you can't necessarily speak to anybody, like you might be freaking out, like like you can't deal with all the pressure that's on you. Um, that's part of the reason why we call it a breakdown, because it's like you're up in your normal regular state and then there's just so much stress. Notice we say you're under. This is part of the logic of prepositions. You're under so much stress, it pushes you down and it breaks you to where you're not feeling so up and normal. You feel really down and your mind is not in a good place. Yeah. So it's not like going crazy where you like completely lose your mind, but it's very, very intense, where you just like you can't function normally because you have so much stress. Um, yeah. I know the meaning of breaking something down, like a sound, the way you said, but when someone is having a breakdown again, yeah, it is like exploding. Yeah, no, definitely not exploding. Exploding, if anything, would be up because it blows up. That's the phrasal verb. Um, but yeah. Okay, see, what is your definition of unaspirated? Is it that there's no puff of air while making it, or there's a puff of air, but not like as the aspirated version of puffing the air? Because it seems to me that they're both unaspirated based on what you told me last time, or in the last told me before. Okay, so let's talk about this. So aspirated, what I usually call strong. This is for the stop sounds for people who may not know. Um, so aspirated, or the strong version of say p, k, and t. Um, there's a puff of air, okay, and if you hold your hand here and you say p, k, t, you won't feel it as much with the t and the k, obviously, because with the p it's coming from your lips, right? But you should feel, as long as you're not too far away, you should feel a puff of air. Um, now you don't want it to be too strong because then it sounds breathy. That would be p, k, t, right? It's too much. So you can do too much. We don't want to do that. Don't go that way. But if you do too little, then it's going to sound unaspirated. Okay, and unaspirated would be little to no air. Okay, it's not necessarily no air, but it's very little air to where we don't really hear the breath. There still needs to be some little bit of force, because if there's absolutely no force, like say I try to say happy, okay, if I say happy, beat, 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 there's no air there at all. I'm just saying, like, I'm trying to push a P out with just my lips, basically. Beat, happy, happy. If you do it that way, you're gonna sound kind of. A lot of people with Asian accents, like thick Asian accents from I don't know exact countries, but probably like Vietnam, maybe Thailand. Um, they kind of do the P, the unstressed P like that, or they'll just do all P's like that, or the Philippines, right? Philippines, the Philippines. There's not really any breath to it. They're just doing but. Um, and that's not quite right in English. So the unaspirated, it doesn't mean that there's no air at all. It just means that we don't want to hear the breath. We don't want to hear the air. Okay, so when I say happy, happy, it's not happy, beat, happy. There's still a little bit of breath kind of coming through the P, right? It's kind of releasing very gently, but not enough for us to actually hear that. It's not happy, 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 happy. Okay. So there's this balance, and it can be, depending on your native language, this can be difficult to get. Okay. So for unaspirated, you don't want to go so small that there's absolutely no air at all. And for aspirated, you don't want to go so big that it sounds like breathy, like there's too much air. Um, and then for the aspirated P itself, right, the faster we speak, the less we're going to hear that air. Okay, just because that's how speech works. We have less time to hear each sound, and we're not necessarily putting as much force into each word. So that's part of the dynamic range and flow of the pronunciation here. So if I say, for example, pick, nice and clearly, really clearly enunciated, like I want you to hear that word specifically. Pick. You have pick, pick it up. Okay, pick it up. But that has a little bit of a range before it gets to that weak P. Okay, so that's part of the range. It's not just like aspirated, unaspirated. Those are the basic 2 points. But in reality, if we're speaking a little bit faster, a little bit more lazily, what's supposed to be an aspirated or strong P won't necessarily, it's not going to go all the way to an unaspirated P, but it does have a bit of a range to where maybe we still hear that air, but we don't hear it as clearly. Okay, so instead of saying pick, I can say pick, pick, pick. There's still, you may not be able to hear me perfectly through the headphones here, but there's still that bit of air that is audible if you listen for it. It's just not super, super clear, right? But then if I go all the way to the unaspirated P and I try to say that in this word here, it would be like pick, 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 pick. There's just not quite enough force there. And if we're speaking maybe really, really fast, maybe we'll hit that unaspirated P for the aspirated P. So if I say like, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, okay, pick, 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 then maybe that's possible in really fast speech, but it's not supposed to be unaspirated. So again, it's a range, okay? It's like a range within a range. Um, and then of course we have the stops and all that. The P and the K, they don't have 2 week versions, they're just 1 week version. So that there's no puff of air while making it. Oh, there's puff of air. I don't like that version. Yeah, so to use your specific question, so there is, I wouldn't even describe it as like a puff of air. It's that there is air, there's airflow, but you don't want to have sort of a puff that comes out with it. It's not right or k. So the air is flowing, but it we don't hear it. It's not strong enough for us to hear. It's just kind of enough to release the sound. Um, okay. So I hope that makes that clear because I know this is a problem that you've been having for a little while now. If not, let me know and I'll try to explain that a little bit better or add more detail to that. But hopefully that will solve the problem. Felipe, welcome. How to pronounce thinking about? Is it possible to connect, say, thinking about going out? Okay. Um, good question. This depends on the exact details of your pronunciation. And by that, I mean, right, I talked about this in the lesson about the ing hack. So if you haven't watched that, you can watch that. Just type in English hacks ing hack, and it should come up. But there are 2 ways to do this. Both of them can link, okay? But there's 2 ways to do this. The standard way that you're taught, which is, as I talked about, and why there's not just one neutral pronunciation in American English, the standard way that most people try to teach you uses, for the ing ending, they use eh plus okay? So it'd be like thinking, thinking. It's kind of hard for me to do that because I don't do that. Or going would be going, going, going. The way that I speak and the way that a lot of Western Americans speak would be, which again, this still sounds neutral because it's such a small difference. It doesn't matter. It's a slight variation. What we do is we do e plus n. Okay, and maybe not all people from the Western United States do this, but this is one of the small differences in accent that still sounds generally neutral. Um, and so the way I say this, I don't say thinking, I say thinking. Okay. And sometimes, especially if I'm kind of lazy, I'll probably hit eh, but I go into the n instead, which is actually how I recommend that you do it. The ing hack, I actually gave you a special recommendation, and you can do that. But the short, easy thing that I could recommend is to just do the n instead of the if it's the added ing to a verb. Not if it's sing, you can't do that. Okay, you have to do in the back. But if it's added ing to a verb, one of the easy things that you can choose to do is just do e plus n or I plus n, doesn't matter, and you'll sound perfectly fine. Okay. But I mention this because in one case, we're going to connect the N to the next sound. In the other case, we're going to connect the which I call the back N, into the next sound. So it depends on how you pronounce it. But in both cases, yes, they can both link because remember, general rule number one, you haven't seen the 4 general rules of linking, right? 4 general rules of English linking, capitalize English. I have a lesson that should be called something like the 4 general rules of English linking. And if you haven't seen that, go watch that because that is like that's half because there's a part 2 for it with the 4 big exceptions. They're not actually exceptions, but that's the first half of like the 80-20 of English linking. It covers most cases of linking in combination with part 2. They'll cover like 80% of all linking rules. So watch that if you haven't, but the number one general rule that is probably the most common thing throughout the entire English language is that consonant sound, not just letter, consonant sound at the end of a word will always, no exceptions, connect to a vowel sound at the start of the next word. Okay? So in this case, what do we have? Well, if you do n, that's a consonant. If you do the version with that's also a consonant. Then we're going to the in about, or in the second case, we're going to the ow diphthong in out, right? So consonant to vowel, right? So guaranteed, yes, they will link. It's just you have the 2 options, either do the regular n or the back n. So if I do the regular n, thinking about, and it's going to sound like the n sort of moves over. Thinking about, or going out, right? If I do the back n, I don't usually do here, but it would be something like thinking about, or going out. Okay, perfectly fine. Very good. YJ, welcome. Thanks for stopping by and joining us today. Which, by the way, guys, I'm going to have to end soon. Going to 2:30 here. If I want a chance to finish that lesson by tonight that I'm doing on thought chunking, I'm definitely going to have to not do a super, super long live today. So we'll try to finish up what we have here and then end the stream. But let's see. When I pronounce Edwin, people hear. Okay, so we would phrase like people hear me saying, or people say it sounds like. You sort of like combine those 2 phrasings and they don't quite work together. But yeah, so we'll say people hear me saying, or people say it sounds like I'm saying. That would work. Edwin. Okay, could you please pronounce the word? I have a problem transition D to W. Yeah, okay, so Edwin. So I would imagine, so maybe you're saying it like Edwin, kind of like that. Because if you do that, yes, that's not going to sound right. To go from D to W, this is actually relatively easy. I know depending on your language and stuff, it's not necessarily easy, right? Obviously, you're having a problem, but it's not particularly difficult to get it once you know what's going on. So we have the D, and the D, of course, we know closes up here, top of your teeth, or front teeth, top of your mouth. D. Okay. Now the W is with the lips. which is independent, right? So we can basically overlap them. And what's going to happen is you go into the D, you can bring the lips out for the W. This is probably what you're not doing. You bring the lips out for the W before you release the D. Okay, that's the trick. If you don't do that, you're going to have an extra sound between the D and the W. Edwin. Okay, but if you bring the lips out for the W and then release the D, Edwin. And it doesn't have to be all the way out before you release the D, but you shouldn't release the D before the lips start coming out. Okay, Edwin, Edwin, dua, 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 Edwin. Okay, that's going to create a little bit of a combination there, and that should solve the problem. So if that doesn't solve the problem, let me know, and we can maybe try to figure out what's going on there, but that should be it. Really, the hardest part is coordinating your tongue and your lips at the same time, which can sometimes be difficult, but that's what you got to do. If you do have problems with that, I would make sure that you can do a D, an actual English D really well, not some sort of like dental version, just like the regular D. Because remember, the dental is for the TH, not the D. So you can do a nice good D sound, and then you can also do a nice good W sound, right? Make sure those two are good, make sure the pieces are good as always, and then try to combine them. I'm still confused about this. What sounds better to you? If you don't mind me asking, am I asking? The phone rings and you pick up. The other person asks for Mr. Moore. Yes, this is him. He's speaking. Okay. Blah. So yeah, I think these are the same problem. The first one, at first, I wouldn't think of it to be that problem because of how grammar has changed almost completely. But I think it's the same problem. So let's start with the second one. If anybody here speaks Spanish, this is going to make a lot of sense to you. Depending on your native language, if it doesn't work like Spanish, then it might be a little bit weird. But English, remember, again, this is a grammar point that is changing, and I would say this particular point has pretty much completely changed. It's like 99% there. And basically what's going on here is, right, the subject pronoun is supposed to be used for the subject. And we know that, right? If I say he is tall, he wants to leave, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we know we say he. We don't say him is tall, right? That doesn't work. But technically, according to grammar, when we say this is, and then the subject, right? Because we say, oh, hello, can I speak to Mr. Moore? And I say, this is, I would say he, right? That's supposed to be what's grammatically correct, but pretty much nobody ever uses anymore because it's almost completely changed. But you're supposed to traditionally use the subject pronoun because I'm saying I'm the subject, right? This is he. Okay. And Spanish has kept that. English has dropped that. Which in Spanish, I'm not sure if they would actually say yo or él in this case. They might use a different subject pronoun, but they would use a subject pronoun. Where in English, what has happened, and you'll still hear some grammar teachers tell you that this is wrong and blah, blah, blah. And I can almost guarantee you that at least in an American English, at least probably 90% of people don't do that, like ever. This is a grammar point that has almost completely changed. And so what we'll say is, yes, this is him. Okay, that's the new grammar. And 50 years from now, that's going to be the grammar. Because most of the people who would say he are either extremely educated and actually care about it, or they're old, right? And nothing against old people or anything, but 50 years from now, a lot of them are probably not going to be here. And it's going to be almost 100% of people are probably just not even using that word anymore, or that rule. So that's your answer. Okay. And I recommend that you ignore that old rule and use the new rule. Okay, say yes, this is him. Yes, this is her. Yes, this is, whatever. Okay. Um, in the first case, if you don't mind me asking, if you don't mind my asking, um, I'm sure if I looked up the exact grammar here, it would probably fit the same problem. But all I can say for this, without looking at the grammar to verify, um, if you say, if you don't mind my asking, that sounds good. If you say if you don't mind me asking, that also sounds good. Um, one of them is right, but they both sound good. My asking, to me, it feels a little bit, I don't want to say dated, but it sounds maybe a little bit more correct, a little bit more proper in a way. So that's probably the correct one. Where me, it still sounds supernatural. It doesn't sound wrong in any way. It's just if I were to choose one and you say which one is correct and I had to guess, I'd probably say my asking. Um, so if this is, I'm as I said, I'm pretty sure this is the same issue in both sentences. And if it is the same issue, now because we're not saying like him, her, whatever, we're using me or my uh, instead of like me or I, right? It's my instead of I because it's like my asking instead of like we wouldn't say I asking. If you don't mind I asking, like doesn't make any sense. So it changes to my, which is the possessive pronoun. Um, even if it's the same type of problem, we're now using that possessive pronoun instead of the subject pronoun. And so in this case, they both sound fine to me, which means that for most natives, we'd probably just use either one, and it doesn't really matter. So, but are you really sure there's no air coming out of your nose when you say in or send? It's just so clear to me. Oh yeah, I wouldn't call it a different sound. Just a little bit of air coming out of your nose while you say it. The tongue position stays the same. Okay, good. So, well, that's good clarification. Yes, so we're on the same page there. So, well, okay. I guess I should clarify this. So when I say that flap in the back, right? Because you close off the air. I just close my mouth, right? There's a flap back here that since the air can't flow through your mouth, it goes through your nose, right? And that flap will open and close. Now, people who have a little bit more of a nasally sound to their voice, like I have a little bit of a nasal sound, but there are speakers who, within whatever language they maybe speak a little more nasally or not. English isn't a particularly nasally language, but there are speakers who have a little bit more of a nasal sound. And for those speakers, there's always going to be a little bit of air coming through no matter what. But of course, there's going to be more in the actual which are the nasal sounds themselves. For people who don't really have much of a nasally sound in the way they speak, um, I'm not saying that there's no air coming out of your nose uh, with the vowel. What I'm saying is that number one, it's the same vowel sound, right? It's not changing or anything. Number two, when I say that flap starts to open a little bit in anticipation for that nasal consonant sound, the N, M, or um, because it opens slightly, not all the way, because if I open it all the way, then I'm going to sound more like this, and I'm going to sound really, really nasally, right? But it just starts to open a little bit because we're going to go say in. So it kind of starts to open, and that starts to create a little bit of distortion in the pure sound of eh as or before I either before or as I go up and towards the end. And then as I close the end, obviously the flap opens all the way because now the air can't flow through my mouth anymore. Um, so let's see, how was this phrased before? So it's not that it changes the vowel before it or anything like that. There is technically a little bit of air that can come through the nose in preparation for the nasal sound, but to say that it changes the vowel or that there's something substantially different happening there would be inaccurate. Um, the only exception to that, I think, would be ah. Not something substantially different. There can be a little bit of difference with the back of the tongue for ah plus n or m. Um, but is sort of a special case because there's this raising or not raising, and it's actually a range within the way people speak. Not everybody uses it. Not everybody will use the raised version, and not everybody will use it all the time. So that's a little bit more complicated within the universe of the sound. It's a whole different topic, but I would say for all other vowel sounds, it's just a little bit of distortion of the sound that doesn't actually change the sound itself. It doesn't affect the way you make the sound. Mr. Machiavelli, hello. Yeah, we are running over time, guys, so we're going to have to, I see David is leaving. Yeah, we're going to have to finish it once I finish these questions, so no more questions. No more questions, except Rodrigo. I am doing well. You can ask a question because you just got here and you're also a member, so I will allow you to ask one, maybe two questions if you get them down before I finish answering these other questions, but then we're going to be done. Okay, Mr. Machiavelli, I am doing well. Hope you are as well. I have a question, please. I know the word sick is pronounced with the short I. Oh, I hate that terminology. Okay, with the I sound, but sometimes I hear it as Americans say an eh. Okay. What's probably happening here, I can't say 100% for sure because there might be something weird going on, but what I'm going to assume is the case. In Western American English, at least, I don't know if this is something that maybe some people in other parts of the country do. Maybe not everybody does it, but I know that in Western American, we actually have a bit of a bigger range for the I and the eh. Okay, so the short I and short E, which I hate those terms, but and what can happen is I compared to where it should be can actually come down a little bit towards and still sound like and can come down a little bit towards and still sound like and in the second case, there's actually more than just the position, like the height difference between and there's a little bit of a shape difference and a tenseness difference that makes actually the main difference between the two. I'm going to make a lesson on that later. But yeah, so instead of it just being like like we can do like eh, eh, and it's kind of, it looks like a lot. It's actually not much, but it's relatively small inside the mouth. But especially with the because I can produce the sound with my mouth being quite open. Eh, It's not 100% perfect, but eh, 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 eh. The exact quality of those sounds is a little bit different, right? But they all basically sound like an sound. And that's an exaggerated example. I'm not saying that Western Americans do that. But with right, I could do like maybe be a little higher. Eh, 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 Still right? Again, for that's partially because it's also the shape, not just the height. But the main point here is that say we say sick, 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 sick. Now, if I bring it all the way down into a really clear sound, it is going to be a different sound. Sec, sec. But I could say, for example, with sick, right? Si, sick, sick. Maybe I bring it down a little bit, but not all the way into sick, si, sick, sick, sick. And that can happen. That can happen. It's almost on the line between and but it's not quite. If I were to be on the line, then it wouldn't be clear which sound we're saying to natives, right? But it's like almost to that line where it starts to kind of almost get a little bit like the next sound, but it's still, we would still recognize it as the proper sound, the now, what I recommend for you as English learners, it's super useful to be aware of that, right? To know that, because then that explains it. Like, oh, okay. Number two, make sure your ears are very trained. so you're not getting confused by anything, because sometimes the difference between I and without this added problem, just regular I and is not clear to some people's ears, so make sure it's clear to you. Same thing with and and E and I, of course, but and especially. So a little bit of ear training can help. But mostly, in terms of your own speech, completely ignore it. Okay, just completely ignore it. Just do a good do a good Don't worry too much about the fact that some speakers might do these two sounds a little bit lower compared to some other speakers. It's possible. It can happen. You don't have to care. Okay, just be aware of it and make sure your ears are able to hear those sounds properly. So, will it sound neutral if I use ing if I don't have the cot merger since the West Coast has it? So you're talking about for the ing ending, even if you don't have the cot merger. Okay, so well, here's the thing. So the replacing ing with ing, if that's what you're talking about, I assume that's what you're talking about. It's technically a completely separate thing than the cot merger. Now you would assume, okay, well, if most Westerners have the cot merger and most Westerners say in, well, we have to say in, not ing, but the hack, I actually tell you to do e plus ng, because for various reasons. But anyway, regardless, that change to ing or in instead of ing, you would assume if most Western Americans do that also, then you would have to do both of them in order to sound neutral, right? And that I don't think would be true. The thing, I don't know if you've seen my lesson about why there's not one neutral American accent. If not, definitely go watch that. But um, this is a point that I don't think I really talked about and that I actually haven't considered too much. I don't think it really matters because the right, like say, let's take the cot merger. Okay. Um, the difference, the resulting difference in the flow of normal speech, whether I say hot, or whether I say cot, right? So let's do cot. So cot, right? Which I'm exaggerating the all because I don't really know how to do it exactly. I can hear it better now, but I haven't mastered producing it because I don't care and I don't need to produce it. The resulting difference is so small because the reason why they merged is because this was down here and it went back, and then this one was up here, had the lips. We got rid of the lips and it just came down, and now it's just one sound. And so the resulting difference is so small that in the flow of speech, like if you're listening for it, if somebody is trying to analyze your accent, right, and they say like, I want to know exactly what part of the country you're from, and they're aware of things like this, or like maybe they've heard a lot of people from a particular region and it kind of stood out to them or something, and they're really listening, they'll probably notice a difference, right? So I'm not saying that there's no accent, but the differences in accent across most of the United States is so small that the people who speak in most places across the country are recognized or would be recognized by the average native speaker as sounding neutral, right? That doesn't mean they sound exactly the same. And I know this is weird, but this is just how American English is, right? If you sound like a neutral American English speaker, the exact sounds that you use might be a little bit different if you're from one part of the country compared to another part of the country, and that's perfectly fine. Okay. So it's this weird thing where there's accents that all sound neutral. So back to your point here, I'm actually not 100% entirely sure with this particular issue where you're sort of mixing things between the accents, but because they all generally sound neutral, as long as nobody is like specifically trying to hear, the details of your pronunciation, you're just like speaking normally and somebody's just understanding you normally and it's just an average speaker. If you were to mix things like this, I don't think it would matter. I really don't. I'd be surprised if it stood out in any way. like any way more than it normally would to anybody because it doesn't really stand out to begin with. So I would say yes, it would still sound neutral. Um, yeah, especially because, right, one of the interesting things about, say, with the cot merger, I wasn't aware of this until David pointed it out. Oh yes, and I noticed that David left. Sorry, David, if you're still here, I kept you. Goodbye. uh, probably left already, but um, yes, I will talk to David later. Uh, say with the cot merger, the thing is, what was I saying? I was thinking of something. Oh yeah, so like I have the cot merger, and yet I wasn't aware of this before. David pointed it out to me quite a while ago in one of the comments. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I didn't notice it in myself until I was paying attention to my videos as I'm editing them. And I noticed if you listen very closely, sometimes you will hear me use the unmerged versions. I'm not aware of this. I never heard the difference. Now, because I'm a little bit more conscious of this, I will occasionally catch myself using the unmerged version. And apparently, people with the cot merger, which by the way, the cot merger is actually something that for the last 40 years has been moving across the country. So you should probably use the cot merger anyway, but you don't have to. There's nothing wrong not merging them. But most, like more and more speakers are actually speaking with the merger, even from the middle of the country and the East Coast. But anyway, that aside, um, God, see, I lost my thought. I keep going off on tangents. I can't do that. Cot merger. Don't notice something. Yeah. Anyway, point is, if you listen really, really closely, you will sometimes hear me use the unmerged version, even though I have the merger. Okay. And oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. The reason why is because apparently people with the merger, they don't hear the difference. Now I can hear the difference a bit better because I'm more aware of it and I've kind of practiced a bit. But they won't usually by default they won't really hear the merger when other people use the unmerged, or they won't hear the unmerged version when other people use it. Um, or at least most of the time they won't. It'll sound really strange if they do notice it. Um, but when they speak, sometimes the unmerged version of those sounds will come out for whatever reason. And so it's a strange thing, but that would be a piece of evidence that I would say that you would still sound neutral if you sort of mix things like this, because even people who have the merger, even if we don't hear it from ourselves, sometimes we do use the unmerged version. Okay. And it's still going to sound neutral. It's not going to matter. So even within the cot merger, like people who have it are constantly using both merger and the unmerged version. We probably more commonly use the merged version, but that unmerged version does happen, and it doesn't really stand out. Okay, so um, I wouldn't worry about it. Oh yeah, I noticed I pronounce lava with the merger, even though I don't have it. Interesting. Yeah, see, there you go. Um, like the merger is a point that really like it doesn't matter. I teach the merger, one because I speak that way, but number two because I think it's generally easier. Instead of learning two sounds and then the second sound you have to have like your lips involved, like ah or whatever it is. Like you just learn one sound, right? It's just easier that way. It's simpler. You have one sound you don't even have to care about. So that's how I teach it, and that's how I generally recommend. But if you already know those two sounds and you generally know how to speak with without the merger, even if maybe some words you do say with the merger, who cares? That's fine if that's how you want to speak. Uh, but it's not necessary. Like whether you use the merger or not, you're going to sound neutral. Okay, as long as you're hitting the proper sounds in the unmerged version or the proper sound in the merged version. Right, you got to get the sounds right. But if you're doing them right, it doesn't matter. Okay. Um, so it's the same with ing and ing, and also like as I mentioned earlier, like with say thinking, I'm very naturally that ing that's added I'm very naturally going to go E plus N. But as I said, if I'm lazy, I'm not paying attention, whatever, like I will sometimes, I've noticed in my recordings, occasionally you'll hear me say I plus N. So even though I do the N, I might do the I. And so there's actually a range between E and I for this particular combination for the plus the or N for the ing ending, where it really doesn't matter if you hit E or I, right? And then for the added, again, added ing ending to verbs, not all ings, it doesn't matter if you do N or N. Okay, so any combination between n, n, for that added ing to verbs, they all sound neutral. They all sound perfectly fine in the flow of normal speech. That's not a problem. So, yeah. Anyway, right, real speech is messy, guys. Real speech is messy. This is part of why I'm here to help kind of pull these things apart and say, hey, this is that, where things that maybe other teachers wouldn't teach you, or either because they don't think of it, or they don't notice it, or they don't think it's important for you to know, or whatever reason, I don't know. But that's part of why I'm here, is to it makes it more complicated, unfortunately, a little more complex, because there's more details and things, and you don't necessarily have to care about all of those, but when we have questions like this, it's useful to go in and sort of start picking things apart and understand what's going on. So anyway, way over time from when I wanted to end this, which of course I'm the one talking here, so that's fine. I don't see any questions from Rodrigo, which is okay. You don't have to ask any questions, but I'm glad you're here, if you're still here. So we're going to finish here. And thank you to everybody who came and asked questions and interacted. Especially thanks to Finn. Again, I can't remember if you were here before or not, but whatever. Thank you for coming today and asking very good questions. Yeah, I think that's about it. So I will see you guys again next week. I'm going to, I always change the time a little bit for different time zones, not a whole lot because I have a window here. So next time I'll start a little bit later, maybe an hour later, so half an hour later. But same day next week, and I'll see you guys then. So, bye-bye.